Gearswin Farm Twill's family home, the seat of the Church of Hringwindla, the archaic secret tucked away in the forest behind the village of Brinkwood, ringed by trees older than the Industrial Revolution which had turned the village into a bypassed backwater, loomed large in my imagination as the perfect location to perform real magic. Our previous visit had involved an unexpected collapse of reality, though we hadn't known that at first. The onrush of false dusk, things going bump in the night, windstorms and monsters, and a trip deep into the earth to meet a god. The crumbling, isolated farmstead had all the hallmarks of a beautifully Gothic setting. Where better to waggle one's fingers with mystical import and mutter abracadabra, while thunder crashed and spooky violins played in the background. Rain had shown me far too many Hammer horror classics. They were rubbing off on me. So, as we trundled along the road out of Sherrowford and through the still damp countryside, the rational part of me was trying to keep calm in the face of one of the most serious and dangerous magical tasks we had ever set ourselves, hands plucking and picking at the hem of my hoodie, tentacles bundled in my lap and trying not to clench. But another part of me, small and girlish and perpetually 9 years old, giggling over spooky stories with Maisie, was beside herself with fangirl glee. She didn't dare come to the surface. That would have been wildly inappropriate. I was too afraid for the safety of Evie and Kim, and yes, Felicity as well. Too focused on the day ahead. Too worried about Edward Lilburn's response to our opening salvo. But when we reached Gearswin Farm, gingerly unfolding ourselves from inside Rain's battered red car to stand around on the old broken tarmac and wait for Felicity to catch up in her Range Rover with the others, that girlish and excited Heather inside my chest did a little pout. Gearswin Farm was not dressed in grand rags of black lace and the heavy shadows of ghostly promise, like some cheap Halloween decoration. It was after all the height of summer, despite the aftermath of the Aimborn storm. The sky was a clear, milk-tainted blue, brushed by a few wisps of fluffy cloud, ringed by the healthy, thick, verdant green of the woodland canopy, like one stood at the bottom of a bowl of wood, topped with leafy garnish. The forest rustled softly in the gentle wind, distant birdsong soaked through the trees. Strong sunlight revealed the general disrepair of the farm as anything but grandly melancholic. I wondered if Hringwindla understood that his most faithful worshippers, the core of his cult, desperately needed funds for major renovation work. The pair of alpacas and the cluster of sheep had been moved to the smallest of the uneven, soggy fields, the one attached to a proper shelter for them, made of old brick and new corrugated steel. The largest of the fields had been prepared for us in advance, mowed by hand, a task that Twill had complained about incessantly, despite the fact it had apparently only taken her 30 minutes. Being a werewolf conferred some major advantages in stamina. A massive area of field was shorn down to stubs of grass, thistles chopped, weeds murdered, to make way for the unnatural act we were about to commit. But the pile of grass cuttings and bits of wheat against the nearest fence made it look more like an unfortunate site for a village fairground. Hringwindla's bubble servitors were all over the place, many dozens stronger than on our previous visit. They ringed the fields in overlapping curves of silently bobbing sentries, hovering over the clearing like on-station drones, lurking along the driveway to intercept any unwanted visitors. A few waited out in the road, watching for the wrong kind of car. They clustered on the roof of the house, piled up on each other in a slowly seething mass of semi-transparent, greasy, iridescent spheres. The effect was not menacing, it made the house look like it was wearing a silly wig. I obviously couldn't keep the disappointment off my face entirely. Zheng noticed. Zheng had arrived at the farm ahead of the rest of us. She had set off out the back of number 12, Barnslow Drive, as we'd been figuring out who was going in which car. She wasn't even out of breath, standing there like a muscular and immovable statue. She wasn't locked in a face-off with Hringwindla's bubble servitors this time, though a pair of the dubious, disgusting angels had detached from their guard duties to discreetly shadow her. Very discreetly. She stood there in her grey jumper hiding her curves, long coat containing her toned muscles, booted feet planted firmly on the crumbling tarmac. She stared out across the fields as if they would soon be the site of a battle. Impassive, heavy-lidded, undeniable. She was everything this situation was not. And she heard my tut and looked around. Shaman. Oh, it's nothing. Nothing. I tutted again, huffed at myself and dithered on the spot, which made nothing sound like a total lie. Which it was. Everyone else was already in motion, Rain striding up to our welcoming party at the front door, to shake Christine Hopton's and Michael Hopton's hands, and clap Twill on the shoulder, Preem unlatching the boot of the car to haul out the buckets of blood, Evelyn clomping forward with her walking stick to frown professionally at the fresh-cut grass in the field. Nothing, shaman. I made a grumbly sound. You're too perceptive, Jing. It's the sunlight. The birdsong. The nice outdoorsy feeling. This isn't the right place to do magic. It should be darker. Less clean. Spooky. I winced and put a hand to my own face, followed by a tentacle. Oh, listen to me, this sounds so stupid. Jing chuckled, low and dark. The shaman has a point, she said to Evie, only a few paces away. Poor aesthetics, wizard. Evelyn answered without a moment's hesitation, she was truly switched on this morning, present and correct in every single second of the clock. Mechanics care not for aesthetics. She looked around not at Jing, but at me. Heather, what was the very first thing I ever told you about magic? I know you recall, because you seem to recall everything I've ever said to you. I know, I sighed. I apologize for being silly. Evelyn tutted. You have absolute license to be as silly as you bloody well like. But you can't take the literature student out of me. My imagination insists we should all be wearing robes and tying somebody to a sacrificial altar. Joining hands and chanting. Drawing pentagrams. Taking copious amounts of hallucinogens. Magic is not black cats and broomsticks. I sighed again. I know. I'm sorry. Stop apologizing. Preem stepped up to join us. A pair of sealed white food-grade buckets dangled effortlessly from each hand. Black cat, she said, staring at Evelyn. No, said Preem. I would like a black cat. Evie and I blinked at her. Jing stared too, though less surprised. Evelyn lowered her glasses. Preem, what? Black cat. Brown cat. White cat. Orange cat. Cat. Are you asking for a pet? Evelyn let out a sudden, sharp sigh. I felt a horrible, winding tension go out of her, felt her weight press down on my support. Preem, now is not the time. Come on, we need to go greet our hosts. You and I can talk about cats later. Bloody hell. Evelyn shook her head and stomped off toward where Twill and her parents were waiting, with Amanda Hopton hovering just inside the doorway, her shoulders flanked by a pair of smaller bubble servitors. All I need, right, Evelyn muttered as she dragged me along after her. Daughter wants pets. What next? Later, later. I looked back and caught Preem's eye, blankly milk-white. But I could have sworn I saw a twinkle in the depths. Silently, I mouthed back at her, good job. Preem followed, buckets of blood in hand. Jing set off for a circuit of the fields, probably to antagonize the locals. Felicity's car finally pulled into the driveway behind us. Evelyn dragged me onward, to greet the church. Listen carefully, said Evelyn. And no, not because I'm only going to say this once, or some equally puerile nonsense. I will happily repeat any part of this as many times as you need, backward or forward. I will translate it into Latin and German. I will draw diagrams. I have already drawn diagrams. Wait, no, Kim has drawn diagrams, thank you, Kim. Everyone say thank you to Kim, because God knows I can't draw. I will repeat myself until I am blue in the face, and then I will step aside so Kimberly or Felicity can repeat it again in a slightly different accent. Listen carefully, because there are a lot of us here, and we all need to know our places. We are about to do something incredibly dangerous, in the sense that operating a large piece of industrial machinery is dangerous, while also bracing for return artillery fire. We need to not get in each other's way, and we need to know exactly what to do if something goes wrong. So, listen up. Evie's steel-shod eyes softened instantly as she lifted them toward the back of the room, and added, in much gentler voice, "That goes for you too, Tenny. Your job is to stick with Lozzie and stay safe, indoors, and then go with her to Camelot if something bad happens. But it's important that you understand what the rest of us are going to be doing. If you don't want to speak up in front of everyone else, you can ask me or Lozzie whenever, after we've all finished talking. Do you understand?" Tenny, with 3 biscuits in the mouth ends of 3 different tentacles, had a look on her face exactly like a child who knew that all the adults would be more comfortable pretending that she was too young to understand the topic of discussion. But she wasn't. And she was here for her own safety. She bit her own lips and hunched slightly in her chair. She didn't need further encouragement to stick close to Lozzie. I had hoped that a change of scenery would be a nice trip for Tenny. She got on well enough with Twill, surely she'd be interested in where Twill lived. But since the moment she and Lozzie had slipped back from Camelot, appearing in the Hoptons' kitchen, Tenny had adopted all the overt nervousness of a little girl who didn't know how to act in an unfamiliar household. "Tens will be fine," Lozzie chirped. One of her arms was buried deep in the grasp of 2 of Tenny's tentacles. "Won't you, Tens?" Tenny trilled, which made the Hoptons jump again, all except Amanda. The Hoptons had so far responded to Tenny with polite bewilderment and nervous flinching, which I thought was a bit much considering their giant cone-snail godfriend beneath the soil of the forest. At least Amanda Hopton Hringewindla's conduit and closest and most beloved of this generation of human beings had taken Tenny entirely in her stride. She'd even shaken Tenny's hand, which was very sweet. Tenny had instantly liked the idea and shaken everybody else's hand. Amanda's golden retriever, Bernard, was currently curled up at the foot of Tenny's chair, content to receive slightly nervous pettings from one of Tenny's tentacles, filling for Marmite. Marmite himself had been left at home. We didn't want to risk him getting hurt if something went wrong and he panicked. We and there were a lot of us were gathered in the Hoptons' dining room, the spacious and airy termination to the long spinal corridor which ran the length of the house. Cozy, rustic, and genuinely lived in, the dining room boasted a large and functional fireplace, currently unlit, very much to my taste. 2 massive landscape photographs of forest vistas seemed to invite the woods indoors, along with the bank of windows and the glass patio doors looking out on the back fields. Waves of bright, clean sunlight flooded the room. The last time I'd visited this space it had all seemed rather more sinister, in the wake of the nightmare-twisting effect of Hringewindla's parasitic infection. But now, sitting around with cups of tea and complimentary planning biscuits, it felt more like we were organizing a harvest festival or an elaborate surprise birthday party. The mages Evelyn, Kimberly, and Felicity stood up front, Felicity politely off to one side while Evelyn and Kimberly flanked a whiteboard on a wheeled frame. Christine Hopton had produced the whiteboard from somewhere seemingly without effort. She was a teacher, after all. While the rest of us had bustled around getting seated, Kimberly had drawn an illustration on the whiteboard, 2 concentric circles, one inside the other, surrounded by little dots and arrows, framed by a quite charming doodle of what was obviously the tree line which surrounded the farm. I could think of nothing more blandly reassuring and less magical than a whiteboard. The rest of us were seated around the scratched, chipped, still grand table. The Hoptons took one side. Christine and Michael Twill's parents and Amanda formed the triumvirate leadership of the church. Benjamin sat at their rear, their meaty bodyguard. They were joined by a further pair of church members none of us had ever met before, a wiry, leathery middle-aged man introduced only as Mr. George, who looked like he'd been pickled in tobacco. The other was a young woman named Katie, stocky and solid, dirty blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail, and obviously armed beneath her baggy clothes. Members of the church who are prepared to do violence in our defense, Christine had explained, very matter-of-fact, when Evelyn had asked. However capable Benjamin may be, we thought it best to play all our cards for this. George had cleared his throat and answered in a voice more smoker's cough than words. We won't get you in your way, Madam Wizard. Windla has vouched for you. We all feel it. This is the truth. Myself and Rain took the opposite side of the table, joined a little awkwardly by Twill. I tried not to read too much into that seating decision, but I respected whatever Twill was trying to communicate. Preem sat at the front, ready to attend to her mother if required. Tenny and Lozzie took the rear of the room, separate and apart, because their job was to stay safe. The only reason they were here instead of back in Sherrowford was to avoid the risk of the house getting hit while the rest of us were absent. The only reason they weren't squirreled away in Camelot was in case something went unfathomably wrong in new and interesting ways. Sevens had donned the mask of the Yellow Princess, starched and proper, umbrella in one hand, skirt perfectly pressed, blonde fringe cut straight as a ruler. Perhaps the Blood Goblin was not proper for serious meetings. Aim amazingly had stayed fully manifested, climbing out of Felicity's car alongside the others. Her black lace layers had grown a matching black hood, which hid her face in deep shadows. Her sleeves had elongated to cover her hands as well, so not a sliver of skin showed. She held Seven's hand through a scrap of black, said nothing, and moved in total silence. Twill had grimaced at this. Could you drop the spooky nun act? I still don't get what you are, but you're making it look like you're a secret weapon or something. Sevens had answered for her, with icy precision, Aim is uncomfortable. Please respect her need to withdraw. Felicity had looked both embarrassed and relieved by this performance, as if she was glad for Aim but also felt a deep responsibility. Zheng lingered in the doorway, drawing nervous glances from the new bodyguards. Stack had not turned up, nor returned Rain's call, nor been spotted lingering at the end of the driveway. After 20 minutes of extra waiting, we had started the meeting. Right, good, Evelyn said to Lozzie and Tenny, then flicked her gaze to Amanda, hardening instantly. Everything I just said goes triple for your god. The last thing we need is him trying to intervene without warning. I take it he's paying attention. The Hoptons all bristled very slightly at the tone in Evelyn's voice. Evie was trying so hard to be polite about Windla, but her basic contempt was impossible to conceal. Her lips soured around the request, but she went through the form. I found myself clenched up in sympathetic embarrassment. Amanda Hopton had looked glassy-eyed and sleepy until that moment, sitting next to her sister along the side of the table. Unhealthy, very pale, with the look of a woman perpetually exhausted, unable to shift the few pounds that kept her overweight. In a way I felt sorry for her. She'd spent most of her life attached mind to mind with her god. But she seemed to value that connection. As she answered, she sat up straighter, still a little unfocused. He is remaining aware, she said. Staying aware. Comprehending us. He will direct his angels to protect this house and his family. While you are here, the protection extends to you all. In grace and hospitality. She smiled, which transformed her face into an innocent bliss. She blinked, a vastness moved behind her eyes, as if iris and pupil were tiny windows on a gigantic aquarium tank. Say hi for me, please, I added. Amanda nodded again, neck muscles like springy rubber. Oh, said Nicole Webb, rubbing her hands together and ostentatiously smacking her lips. I do like a good all-hands briefing. Miss Say, I do hope you're prepared for some very stupid questions. Detective Nicole Webb was our one unexpected arrival, the one we hadn't planned for. She sat to the rear of the group, dressed for a woodland hike, in a brand new and very practical jacket, with lots of pockets and pouches. Hair pulled into a tight bun, energetic in every movement, eyes alive in the manner of a woman who had gotten a full 10 hours sleep last night or no sleep at all. I couldn't tell. Evelyn stamped on the floorboards with her walking stick. There are no stupid questions, she hammered. She managed to make it sound absolutely terrifying. I would have flinched if that tone came from anybody but Evie. Privately I winced, she wasn't exactly making herself approachable. Twill tooted. Steady on, Evie. Stop shoutin'. Evelyn chose to ignore that and spoke to Nicole again. Detective, you really do not have to be here. Nikki raised her hands. 3 of you have said that in 3 different ways. Look, if you want me to bugger off out, let me know, just be blunt. Be clear. I'll run off and you witches can do whatever you're gonna do. Please do not swear in front of Tenny, Evelyn said without missing a beat. She is a child. Oops. Sorry. Nicole twisted in her seat to give Tenny an awkward smile. Bad words. You shouldn't use them, Tenny. Bad words, Tenny trilled. She didn't smile. I cleared my throat. I was near the front of the table, closest to the mages and their ragged presentation. Nikki, none of us want you to leave, not really. But you don't have to put yourself in harm's way, not for us. We can handle this. We know what we're doing. Did we? I had no idea. Evelyn added, level and sharp, you have no responsibility to us, and I will not put you out in the field, even if you are carrying a dozen illegal firearms. I am not, said Nikki. Then you stay in the house with the others, that's. But hey, if anybody has a spare, I won't say no. Nicole spread her hands and gestured around at everybody else. I won't report it or anything. I think we're a bit outside of Sherrowford jurisdiction here. The joke fell like a lead balloon. Nikki's smile was stiff as wire. She was more nervous than she was pretending. Rain jumped in to save her. I thought you hated guns, officer. I'm not an officer anymore. And that was sergeant to you, Haynes. Less your lip. Rain did a boxing stance duck and weave as if dodging a blow, grinning. The atmosphere warmed by half a degree. And for the record, Nicole said, yeah, I don't have any idea what to do with a gun. Point and pull the trigger. I'm well aware this room is probably filled with several weapon and firearm offenses in progress. Nobody call the police, please, it could all get very embarrassing. Katie, the young woman who was obviously festooned with weapons, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She clinked. Mr. George looked like he was trying to pretend he had not heard any of that. Benjamin Hopton, the shaved-headed, heavily muscled church bodyguard, nodded toward the double-barreled hunting shotgun which lay in the crook of his arm. The shotgun was open to reveal the breech, empty and unloaded. Even then he kept the ends of the barrels pointed firmly at the floor. This is licensed. Legal. He paused and cleared his throat. Detective. Yeah, added Michael Hopton. Licensed to me, Ben. That's my shotgun you've got there. We're on your land, Benjamin said slowly and carefully, as if speaking for the benefit of a hidden microphone. You've given me permission to handle and discharge the firearm. Which means it's legal. Yeah, okay, and I'll rescind that permission if you get too happy with it. You be careful with that thing. Christine Hopton, high priestess of the church, cleared her throat and laid one gentle, wrinkle-backed hand on her husband's shoulder. Mike, dear, you would just shoot your toes off. Ben was in the army, you know that. Let him handle the gun. Michael Hopton pulled the uncomfortable face of a man who knew he was wrong. He wasn't doing a good job of keeping his nerves down. It's going to be all right, Mr. Hopton, I spoke up, making eye contact and holding it there. We'll deal with all of this, and I swallowed and tried to think of what to say. To be an angel, to be reassuring. They already held me in uncomfortable respect and a touch of awe, after I had communed with their God, but I needed to assure them we weren't going to bring Edward Lilburn down on them. Or rather, that we could deal with him, if we did. Mine's not legal, said a familiar half-mumble. Everyone glanced at Felicity, but she was staring directly at Nicole. The ex-copper and the outlaw mage locked eyes, dense with frost. I suppressed a wince. Nicky and Fliss had politely shaken hands upon meeting, but the ice had grown between them thick and fast, flash frozen on the bleeding shore of how Kimberly seemed entirely comfortable inside Felicity's personal space. As the mages had set up, Kim had darted about with her pen, asking Felicity for clarification or suggestions on the diagram, and shown zero discomfort at being only inches apart. A mage-detective-mage love triangle was the last thing we needed that day. I made eyes at Nicole, hard eyes, and willed her to be professional. She must have noticed, because she cleared her throat and nodded. "Good for you," she said to Felicity. "Keep it to yourself, yeah." Evelyn cleared her throat louder, rumbling with suppressed irritation, like an animal asserting dominance over lesser squabbles. "Then why are you here, detective? We informed you as a courtesy, because we trust you, and frankly I wanted you warned so you can protect yourself if necessary. My intent was not to call you here." Nicole Webb shrugged and folded her hands over her stomach. "In for a penny. In for a pound," Rain finished the saying. She winked. "Yeah," said Nicole. "Something like that. Gotta see it through, you know. Maybe you'll need somebody to slap cuffs on Edward when this is all over." Evelyn stared at her, pinch-lipped. "It is highly unlikely that we will directly engage Edward Lilburn today." "Yeah," Rain murmured low and soft, not a tone I heard from her often. I turned and blinked at her in surprise, but she was staring at Evie. Twill snorted. "Directly engage," she repeated in a silly voice. "Evie, we're not the Marines." "Don't talk like that." Benjamin interrupted. "Clarity is good. I like it. Right on." Evie ignored the both of them and spoke to Nicole. "Detective, this is your last chance to leave. Once we begin, you'll have to stay until the spell is done and we've confirmed or ruled out a response. Mid-afternoon, if we're lucky." Rain laughed softly. "What happened to over by lunchtime?" "I want the spell itself over by lunchtime." The response, "We can't predict." Nicole nodded once, holding Evie's gaze. "I'm staying with you wizards. Get me a pointy hat if you like." "Fine." Evelyn raised her eyes to the room again. "Right. Listen closely, as I said. Everyone on the same page. We're taking no chances with this." Evelyn ran through the ritual on the whiteboard, pointing with her walking stick, punctuating herself by tapping the wooden head against the plastic surface. I sat in quiet adoration, restraining myself, wrapped in my tentacles. This was Evelyn at the most organized I had ever seen her, marshalling her thoughts, her plans, and her troops. Her eyes were alight as she spoke, soft blue dancing from the board to the people and back again, watching for unspoken questions, for kinked brows, for any hint that somebody was not following. She had missed nothing, covered everything, accounted for the position of every person involved. The mages will only have to remain in the center circle for just under 20 minutes. All three of us will be exhausted when the spell completes, but Kimberly more than myself or Felicity. That's the most vulnerable moment, the moment we need to get back indoors as quickly as possible, regardless of the side effects or anything else that happens. Evelyn jabbed a finger at Zheng. "Kimberly is your responsibility. I don't care how filthy she is by the end. The moment it's done, cross inside the circle, pick her up, and take her inside. You're the quickest of us." Zheng stared, dark and unmoving, leaning against the door frame, the rustic kitchen behind her. Evelyn held that gaze and added, "If you don't want to help, I will assign this task to somebody else." "If you agree and then foo," Evelyn bit down, gaze flickering to Tenny for a split second. "If you agree and then don't go through with it, you put us all in danger." "I will handle the little wizard," Zheng rumbled. Kimberly kept her eyes anywhere but Zheng. I got the impression she would have been happier to walk, or be carried by a bubble servitor. "Good," Evelyn said. "Zheng, thank you. Preem, you're to help me. Twill, you have Felicity. Can I help you?" Twill asked. Evelyn ignored that and carried on, going over the details of what was to happen next, the part after the spell. The long, drawn-out part, the waiting and watching. I don't think I was the only one who saw the shadow pass over her face as she explained this part of the plan, the part we couldn't predict. Michael Hopton asked the obvious question. Miss Say, pardon me, but you keep talking about a response to the spell. What are we expecting here? Evelyn had been about to tap on the sketch again, the lower portion that showed the house with sightlines and a list of who was not allowed outside until this was done. She paused, sighed slowly, and couldn't meet Michael's eyes for a heartbeat. I jumped in. Anything, I said. An invisible chill settled over the room. Mr. George and Michael Hopton shared an uncomfortable look. Benjamin sighed. Christine smiled with bland politeness. Tenny had gone very still. Zheng was unreadable, impassive, a quiet giant. Mages are difficult like that, said Rain, in a voice I'd never heard her use before, a quiet smile through the ghost of a grimace. She was watching Evelyn. You can never predict. Right? Evelyn finally looked up and cleared her throat. He may not respond at all. But that is unlikely. She held up one hand, her good hand, with 4 fingers raised. There are 4 possible outcomes. Number 1, she lowered a finger, is that he chooses to do nothing. A bluff, to throw me off and convince me the spell has not worked. Number 2, another finger down, is that the collapse of his labyrinth will trigger an automatic defense, sending something to the location of whatever has collapsed it. So, us, here. She stared at her remaining 2 fingers. Option 3 is he chooses to send something against us, consciously, intentionally, rather than automatically. She fell silent for a moment, swallowed hard. I noticed the faint tremor in her throat and longed to get up and go to her. Evelyn was hiding it so very well, so well that even I hadn't noticed until that moment. I wasn't even sure Preem had seen. Maybe Evie herself didn't realize. She was terrified. So was Rain, though Rain responded to terror with the biological promise of terrible violence. I'd been so wrapped up in my own self, my own worries, my own trouble keeping track of what we were about to do, that I hadn't noticed the 2 people closer to me than all others were replaying the emotions of an ancient murder as they prepared to go to war with a mage. The ghost of Evelyn's mother hovered over both of them, invisible to all others. Loretta Juliana Say haunted Felicity too, though Felicity was so on edge it was hard to tell the difference. What's option number 4? Asked Trinjwindla, speaking through Amanda Hopton's mouth, slightly slack in the lips. 2 and 3 at the same time, Evelyn answered quickly. Automatic response plus manually dispatched agents of some kind. Twill snorted. Bit dry, isn't it? Agents? We're not in the Matrix or something, Evie, come on. Evelyn's eyes flashed with sudden anger, sharp and hot, all her carefully suppressed terror flowing outward at once as a single burst of redirected rage. Evie! I said before she could open her mouth and offend everybody. Sitting up so suddenly I almost got out of my chair. Evie, Evelyn. Evie. She blinked 3 times and found me, gaze anchoring to mine with an intensity one had not expected. I desperately wanted to get up and hug her right then, but I knew it would undermine her confidence and everybody else's confidence in her. I did not want to emotionally unbalance her before one of the most difficult magical operations of her life. What might Edward send here? I asked. Just any ideas at all? Guesses. Educated guesses. Guesstimates. Guesstimates, Twill repeated with a big wince. Ugh. I know. I huffed, playing along with Twill's hasty save. She must have seen the anger in Evie's eyes too. Rain leaned back in her chair. I reckon it's gonna be a big marshmallow man. Like in Ghostbusters, you know. Rain, Evelyn snapped, do shut up. Now is not the time. But she said it at her usual level of rain-based irritation, rather than giving vent to the burning incandescence of overpressurized fear. Servitors, Felicity spoke up, half mumbling, but with her head raised to address the room. Servitors, or constructs. Possibly revenants, like Sheng there. She nodded toward the back of the room. Or possibly other things. We can't predict. Please understand. He could even send a group of people, maybe a mage he's trained himself. That would be a worst-case scenario, she gulped hard. That's what bullets are for, Rain said, ice-cold and deadly serious. A shiver went up my spine, not all bad. Right, Felicity agreed with a little dry swallow. Right. I did not add that last time we had tried to kill a mage, the bullet had gone right through him to no effect. Amanda spoke up, dreamy-voiced, Cringewindla's angels will turn back any assault. Yes, Evelyn said, a little sour. That's what we're counting on. With luck, even if things do go wrong in some fashion, none of us will actually have to face any direct danger. She sighed. If something does show up, the direction of arrival could give us an idea about the location of Edward's house. Christine Hopton raised her head and spoke. We know it's somewhere between our home and Stockport, correct? That is a very large area to cover. Nicole said, yeah, somewhere about there. She sounded a little bitter. Wherever I went. Yes, said Evelyn. She indicated a curve of space on the whiteboard, just inside the tree line. Which is why I expect that if anything arrives, it will enter the clearing here. Assuming it's not clever enough to circle the farm, in which case we'll have to follow any tracks. Kimberly helpfully added a curve in red, along with a little exclamation mark at either end. Evelyn continued, straight-backed as she could make herself, wearing her invisible general's hat. It is very important that we kill or capture whatever turns up. It will be very difficult to stop any scouts returning to Edward with information, but we must try. Birds, tiny constructs, zombified rabbits. Anything. Make sure Cringewindla understands. Amanda nodded. He does. Does everybody understand? Evelyn swept her eyes across the room. Nods, murmurs, folded arms. Dark eyes of silent acknowledgement. Rain's big thumbs-up grin. My smile for Evie alone. Hope you know what you're doing, Twill said. She said it with a smile, then added, love you, da Mars. However, to my relief and surprise, Evelyn said simply, I have no idea what I'm doing, you moronic mutt. You should know that by now. But, we know exactly what we're doing. Now grab a spade. For that, you're digging half the circle by yourself. No matter how much I made light of the atmosphere, I would have preferred mundane disappointment to the frightening pleasure of Gothic aesthetics. In the end, the three-mage spell did indeed possess more than a whiff of black cats and broomsticks, despite the sunny day and blue skies. Digging the outer circle took about 2 hours. Twill and Preem set to work, both of them basically tireless, helped by Michael Hopton and Mr. George. The mages directed, darting about with diagrams, making sure that each curve of circle and accent of esoteric symbol was at the perfect angle. Zheng could have helped, but she drew an unspoken line at wizards directing her in manual labor. I didn't blame her. Besides, she was required to guard the whole operation at this early stage. The likelihood that Edward is aware of any of this is minimal, Evelyn explained. The real danger is after we fire, not before. But it never hurts to post a lookout. You keep your eyes open too, Heather. Don't we have plenty of those already? I murmured to her, shading my eyes as we stood side by side at the edge of the field, with Sheng only 20 feet away. Bubble servitors, Cringewindla's angels, bobbed everywhere. The way the things moved set my teeth on edge, and made my tentacles twitch with restless motion of preemptive self-defense, but I couldn't deny we were very well protected. There must have been over 200 of the things. I don't entirely trust them, Evelyn murmured back. I trust Cringewindla, I said. Evie, I really do. He wants to help. I know they look icky. But we're in a fortress of the things. Yes, Heather, she sighed. The gentle wind tugged at stray strands of blonde hair. But I don't trust his judgment. Evelyn sighed and rubbed her eyes. Rain was calling for her from halfway across the field, Preem marching over to collect her, to check some minor symbol. I'd managed to draw her off for only a moment, not long enough or private enough to address her buttoned-down, glued-shut fears, the terror leaking from her pores. I imagined I could smell it on her, hot and raw and shivering. Or was I scenting pheromones for real? Evie. Evie, this is going to be fine. We're going to be perfectly safe. She shot me a frown just before Preem reached us. Of course we are. Stop worrying, Heather. This has been mapped out to the smallest possible degree. The worst thing that could happen is we have to spend the night in Twill's house, playing tower defense. I blinked at her. Tower defense? Video game metaphor. Never mind. She turned away as Preem stopped behind her. Come on, let's go fix the spelling, or whatever the problem is. When the circle was finished it filled almost the entire field, leaving a thin margin of untouched grass around the edge, where the sentries were meant to stand while the mages performed the spell. I could barely look at the design dug into the wet, dark, clay-clogged earth of Brinkwood mud. The swirls and spirals of esoteric symbols made my eyes ache, not by themselves but only when placed in reference to each other. The outer circle was a quadruple-layered monstrosity of interlinked lines, with scraps of Latin and Arabic at right angles, enclosing a whirling dance of overlapping symbols, stomach-wrenching signs, and shapes with far too many sides. I stood as far back from the edge as I could without climbing over the fence and entering the tree line. It was like a great dark hole had opened up in the ground. Abyssal instinct wanted me to stay as far away as I could. Evelyn, Felicity, and Kimberly were already waiting right in the center for Preem to return with the canvas which contained the inner circle, the payload for this field-sized gun. Even from halfway across the field I could see Kimberly was quivering with nerves. Felicity was saying something to her, low and soft and undoubtedly reassuring, holding one of her hands. Evelyn had turned away, staring out at the woods. Shaman, Zheng rumbled from a few paces to my right. I'm exactly where I'm meant to be, I said. But I couldn't take my eyes off Evie. Evelyn isn't pulling any punches. I might be needed out here, to do brain math if something goes horribly wrong. Don't tell me to go inside with the others. The others, the baseline humans who were more liability than protection, were beginning to trudge back toward the house. Evelyn's plan called for them to wait on the crumbly tarmac, far away from the spell, and then head inside right away when it was complete. The heavily armed young woman, Katie, was already waiting there, along with Benjamin Hopton, his shotgun loaded and the breech closed. Michael Hopton and Mr. George were heading back too. Nicole was sitting on the front step, a smudge of black jacket and blonde hair. Rain turned and raised a fist to me before she joined them. I smiled and waved. The smile did not reach my eyes. Tenny and Lozzie were already indoors, given free run of Twill's video game consoles. But I spied a little silken black face peering out of one window. Zheng said nothing, just brooded in silence. I let out a long, slow, shaking breath. You are nervous, Shaman. I turned a gentle frown on her. Zheng was a dark silhouette against the rustling trees, her sharp-edged eyes somehow cold in the bright sunlight. Yes, well spotted. I am very nervous. Your tentacles are tense. I huffed. I thought of saying something like how could you tell? But I was too irritatingly polite for my own good. Besides, Zheng didn't deserve to be the target of my own bottled fears. I gestured at Evie with a tentacle, so she wouldn't see. She wasn't wearing her modified 3D glasses, not yet. Evie is terrified, I said. Rain is ready for violence. Real violence. I know not everybody can see it, but I can. Felicity is I don't know. I don't know what she's capable of. It didn't really hit me until we were in the middle of that meeting, I went on. This is unspeakably dangerous, isn't it? We're inviting some kind of attack. A real one. I was thinking of all this more like I don't know. A maypole dance, or something. Jing rumbled in contemplation. I knotted my hands together inside the front pocket of my hoodie. Your wizard is. A wizard, Jing purred eventually, almost too low to hear. Like any other. But she is yours. She follows you. Same as I. I glanced at Jing again. She was staring at Evie too, her expression unreadable, eyelids almost closed as if on the edge of sleep. Does that mean you'll protect her, if you have to? I asked. Jing rolled her neck from side to side, making popping noises with her spine. She rolled her shoulders, flexed her hands, and did not answer, possibly because Twill was trudging across the field toward us, skirting the edge of the circle. She shot me a grin and waved. Twill, I called softly. You're not meant to leave your spot. Yeah, she said as she jogged the rest of the distance, curly dark hair bouncing on her shoulders. But we ain't started yet, right? Least not the main event. You doing okay, yeah? Looked at you through these. She waggled the modified, black-rimmed glasses she was holding in one hand. You look sort of nervous. Tentacles all bunched up and stuff. Bit on edge, you know. Zheng said nothing. I pursed my lips. Ah. Twill said, catching my expression. She even took a half step back. Yes, I sighed. I am nervous. Evie is more nervous, can you not see that? Evie. Twill looked out into the middle of the field. I mean, yeah, duh. Evie's always nervous about this sorta shit. More than usual. Twill, she's terrified. She's bottling it up, and I don't know what to do. Twill eyed Jing briefly, then shrugged and carried on. It's easy, Big H. Just be there for her when this is done. Everything's gonna go off fine, then we can all have tea and you can rub her back or whatever. I didn't find that particularly reassuring. What if it doesn't go off fine? What if we get attacked? What if Evie is wrong? Twill shrugged. We'll deal. Hey, between Zheng and me, we can take anything. You're here too, for like, spooky tentacle magic bullshit. There's at least 3 guns here. And 7 whatever, too, right? Twill nodded past Zheng and around the curve of the circle. Much to my growing consternation, Sevens had also left her post and was heading around the circle to join us. Aim trailed in her wake, clutching Sevens' pale palm through a handful of black lace. Aim looked like a stick dressed in black robes. Oh yes, I said when they approached, unable to keep the sarcasm out of my voice. Everybody just abandon Evie's plan and come join me instead. Sevens, you know where you're supposed to stand. You need to stay where Evie said to stay, I muttered. The ritual has not yet begun, said 7 shades of technical insubordination. Aim and I shall return to our appointed section of the circle momentarily. Twill squinted. Wait a sec, what are you gonna do with the spooky goth kid if we do have to fight something? Sevens answered as if this was a very tiresome question. If I must don another face, Aim will leave for the house. I frowned down at the deep-hooded, faceless demon thing. Not a sliver of flesh was visible beyond the lace. You better not bother our hosts, if that happens. Seven said, Aim has a message for you, kitten. Kitten utterly and unexpectedly disarmed me. Jing grunted, I think it was a laugh, while Twill snorted and covered her mouth, then waved away my embarrassed and offended look. Aim? Sevens prompted, as if the Coalsprite horror was a nervous child. I was about to sigh and roll my eyes when Aim finally spoke up. Yes, I know. I almost shouted. Halfway across the field, the 3 mages looked up, so I lowered my voice, face hot with embarrassment. I huffed and puffed and wriggled my hands free from inside my hoodie so I could gesticulate pointlessly. I know. Everybody knows. Twill knew before I did. Zheng probably finds it obvious. Seven certainly knows. And Evie herself knows it full well, even if we don't talk about oh, for pity's sake, we have a relationship. It's just awkward. Don't mess things up for us, Aim. The twig wrapped in black rags looked up at me. There was nothing but darkness inside her hood. Dumbarse, she said. A call echoed across the field like the toll of a soft and distant bell, places, please. Preem, telling us all to get back into position. She was standing with the mages, inside the inner circle. Evie wore a frustrated little frown on her face, gesturing with her walking stick for us all to stop mucking about. I composed myself, still burning red, and tried to look professional. I didn't fool anybody, least of all myself. I had no idea what I was doing. The others trailed off to their own positions. Sevens shot me an ice-cold look as she left. Perhaps an apology for Aim saying that, I wasn't sure. Zheng stayed by my side as Evelyn had so carefully stipulated, I was not to be left actually alone during all this. Twill bounded away. Amanda Hopton took up position on the far side of the circle, in case the hovering bubble servitors should need any extra direction. The things were everywhere. One of them bobbed not 10 feet behind Zheng and I, watching the tree line. I tried to take some solace in that. I did, in a way, trust Ringwindla, even if his judgment was a bit strange. Once every participant, guard, and observer had assumed their proper positions, Felicity raised a hand and turned in a circle, checking that everybody was watching, everybody was on the same page, and everybody was ready. The alpacas and sheep were tucked away inside their stable. The unaltered humans were by the front door. One could have heard a pin drop. Felicity lowered her hand and said something to Evie. Preem turned and raised her voice. We begin. The 20 minutes which followed were among some of the longest and most uncomfortable of my life. 19 minutes and 33 seconds, according to Evie, but it felt like hours. The minutes slithered along as the three mages stood at equidistant points in the inner circle, whispering bits of language lost to the wind and the rustle of the trees. Seconds crawled slower and slower as I saw Evelyn spit blood, as Felicity turned away to cough red into a handkerchief, and as Kimberly shook with barely contained anxiety. She had the most pivotal role in this, of course. I wished she'd had somebody to support her in that inner circle, as Evie had Preem, but perhaps that would have been too awkward for her, considering what she had to do. Evelyn had told us to brace for anomalous atmospheric phenomena, auditory hallucinations, and possibly vertigo, but that's unlikely. If you have to vomit, make sure you do it outside the circle. Don't break the lines. So when the ambient air temperature plummeted by 10 degrees, we were ready. I put my hands back in my pockets. Zheng gently slid my hood up for me. When the air grew thick with illusory heat haze, we were mostly prepared, though it was very strange to blink away the blurred ground and wavering air, only for it to reform seconds later, like a layer of oil on one's own eyeballs. Nobody freaked out, not too much, anyway, when the air began to sizzle and crackle with something akin to static electricity, moving in waves across one's clothes. Vaguely unnatural, but they were hardly the stuff of nightmares. A light show, at best. Nobody was ready for the vertigo. Evelyn had grossly underestimated it. To be fair, she probably hadn't expected it to be that bad. At about 6 minutes into the spell, into the concentration and chanting Mage-Ly communal bleeding, the ground began to fall away. My earlier sense of the outer circle as the edge of a pit suddenly became all too real. The earth tilted toward a black and gaping mouth, yet it was still level and flat, my senses providing two conflicting sets of data. The inside of the outer circle was a void, hundreds of feet deep, yet the grass was still there, close enough to touch, healthy and green in the blushing sun. The mages in the middle were suddenly very far away, tiny specks on the edge of perception, yet I could see Evie's brow still furrowed in concentration. Even the bubble servitors felt it, scudding upward like greasy clouds, trying to escape a sucking gravity well. The circle was a void, the open maw of something from which the mages were stealing power, a sucking wound in the universe itself. It was an affront to reality, and I knew with a bleeding certainty that to step on it was death. Abyssal instinct quivered. I half climbed up Zheng. Somebody screamed. Maybe me. Maybe Evie. All I knew for certain was that Evelyn opened her eyes and went white as a sheet, eyes pointed downward into that void just beyond the inner circle. Preem said something to her, lips moving, but it didn't help. I squirmed onto Zheng's shoulders and stuck all my tentacles up in the air, all except the one I was using to hold on to Zheng. I pushed their strobing rainbow pulses to maximum brightness. Evie's eyes rose and found the rainbow glow. She stared, nodded, and returned to the spell. In a way, the shock, which was probably an illusion in the end, helped undercut the deep embarrassment of the core part of the spell. While we were all busy getting our monkey brains in a panic over a big hole in the ground, in the middle of the inner circle Kimberly was taking off all her clothes. We'd all been warned about this part in advance. Kimberly had repeated over and over that she was willing to do this. Evelyn lacked the physical strength, Felicity was capable, but she had to keep certain parts of her body covered, for magical reasons, and this part of the spell required actual full-body nudity. Nobody had made a single joke during planning. Not Rain, not Twill, not even Aim. If anybody had dared, I think I would have slapped them with a tentacle. Shaking and shivering, well aware that everybody was politely averting their eyes or too busy upchucking their guts onto the front steps of the farmhouse, overcome by vertigo, Kimberly stepped right into the very center of the inner circle, spread her arms wide, closed her eyes, and held her breath. Preem then emptied both buckets of bull's blood directly over Kimberly's head. She did it slowly and carefully, so not too much blood went off target and splattered across the ground. Once she was done, she tore open the smaller packets of blood and began painting symbols on Kim's back, with a little brush. Kimberly stood there shivering, eyes screwed tight, as the mages made her into a conduit for a metaphorical trebuchet rock we were about to hurl at Edward Lilburn. When I'd asked her one last time the previous night, Kimberly had struggled to explain why she'd agreed to play the central role. "It's no danger to me," she'd said. "I trust Evelyn. I trust Fliss too, though I don't know why." "Yes, I trust Evie too," I'd said, unable to keep the deep and concerned frown off my face. "But that doesn't mean you have to agree to get covered in animal blood in front of everybody. Naked, too. Let Felicity do it. She's more experienced. Fliss has a lot of burn scars. A lot. Really. She doesn't want to be exposed." Kimberly had smiled with surprising gentleness, but then again she had been red-eyed with cannabis. "I don't mind. I don't think I'm really ugly or anything. And it's not like anybody's going to perv over me in the middle of a spell like that. Everyone'll be too busy getting dizzy and stuff." And so we were. Preem finished the design on Kimberly's back, daubing pale skin with crimson blood. That black hole in the earth yawned wide, sucking down great heaving mouthfuls of air. The treetops themselves leaned inward, pulled low by otherworldly force. Kimberly raised her arms over her head, eyes screwed shut, crying softly. For a split second I thought I could hear Evelyn's voice and Felicity's voice together, a jumbled, impossible, burning whisper of sounds not meant for human throats. Then, a hypnic jerk. A blink, as if reality itself had briefly closed and reopened. And then we were all just standing in a field, in the middle of the woods, on a bright and sunny day. The ground was the ground, nothing more, nothing less. I was clinging to Zheng's back, panting. In the middle of the circle the mages all stumbled. Preem caught Evie, Felicity whirled and almost fell over, while Kimberly stood there, shivering and clutching her naked body, caked in bull's blood, slowly drying in the sun. None of us had expected it to end so suddenly. A moment of shock made us all take a breath. "Everyone move." Evelyn spat at the top of her lungs, then coughed blood into the crook of her arm. Preem was already picking her up. The spell was over, time to get indoors, just in case. Jing didn't peel me off her shoulders, she just dropped into a loping run with me still attached, headed for Kimberly like a bird of prey. I almost enjoyed the ride. After all, the spell had worked, we were done. All we had to do was bundle everybody indoors and commence waiting. Time to run Kimberly the most luxurious bath of her life and play video games with Tenny. Time for tea and talking and maybe making sure that Evelyn wasn't so afraid anymore. There was barely time to think. Riding Zheng was like riding the wind. I clung on tight. On our left, a quarter way around the field, just behind Twill, something dark and low burst from the tree line. A blur, almost as fast as Zheng. Lean muscle and sharp teeth. Canine-shaped, without fur, and wrong. It shot under the fence like a bullet, straight past Twill, weaving between the bubble servitors that crashed into the ground like little comets trying to smash and smother this interloper. It shot for the center of the circle, ignoring all else, aimed straight at Kimberly. The spell was cast, the impossible hole in the ground had closed, and reality had reasserted itself. The damage to Edward Lilburn's defenses had already been done. Even if we had been able to watch the metaphorical trebuchet payload boulder batter down the equally metaphorical wall, it was too late. Evelyn had assured us that any effect would be instant. Magic did not respect the human perception of time. There simply was no firework explosion for us to appreciate, no matter that we might have enjoyed a bit of pyrotechnic release after the unbearable tension of the last few hours and days. Stopping us now would make no difference. Edward's only rational move was to limit our ability to exploit the opening we had created or run away. Hence Evelyn's plan to get back inside and await his inevitable answer, or the lack of one. Whatever instructions animated the blur of canine muscle and slavering teeth did not care about that. The hound shape shot directly at Kimberly, flying across the fresh-cut grass and the bare mud grooves of the magic circle, a dark and glinting shadow in the clean sunlight. Or maybe it was a terror weapon. Maybe cruelty was the point. The hound thing was swift and sharp. Zheng was faster, but the intruder had already broken through the outer cordon, the line meant to defend the mages in the center. It had bounded from the tree line, ducked the fence, zipped past Twill, and zigzagged the pursuing bubble servitors. Everybody was moving but nobody was close enough. It all happened so quickly, only a second or two from sighting to impact. I clung to Zheng's back as she sprinted toward the mages, wrapped in tentacles and vibrating with the need to act. Twill was up on all fours, all wolf, hot on the heels of the unidentifiable nightmare hound. On the opposite side of the circle, Sevens had dropped aim and seemed to stride forward several meters for every measured step. Bubble servitors peeled off Amanda Hopton, their protective role fulfilled, streaming toward the center of the circle like soap suds swirling down a drain, over by the farmhouse. A knot of armed humans was spilling into the field rain, Benjamin with his hunting shotgun, the young church member Katie pulling out a revolver. The bubble servitors swirled toward the mages, moving to cut them off from the hound. Canine muscle pumped and kicked, outpacing them by inches. As if designed specifically for this one task. Kim stood in the dead center of the field, a red exclamation mark of success, stark naked, shivering, clutching herself, coated in a rapidly drying layer of sticky crimson animal blood, hair plastered to her neck with gore, eyes a shocking round wide in that bloody smear. The hound thing was so fast that she didn't have time to scream before it was all over, caught in the intake of breath and the widening of blood-rimmed eyes. Felicity was next to her, already turning, wrenching down her own sleeve to expose her tattoos in magical desperation. Evelyn was still stunned, reacting too slowly, her withered leg buckling with effort even as her prosthetic held firm. Zheng veered, going for the hound instead of Kim. Her whiplash motion clacked my teeth together inside my skull and pulled my body weight against the harness of my tentacles. She had realized she wasn't going to reach Kim in time fast enough to pull the hound off her, but not fast enough to prevent it bowling her over and ripping her throat out. I had a split second to act, maybe less. Pushing myself up on Zheng's shoulders, bunching my tentacles like an octopus in a strong current, hissing incoherent noise at the top of my lungs, I had no idea what I was doing, but I used Zheng's momentum and my pneumosomatic muscle mass to turn myself into a kinetic sabo, a term that Rain had to explain to me later. Ready to spring, to leap, to knock the unknown creature sideways, hopefully into the unkind embrace of a waiting bubble servitor. It was stupid, dangerous, and probably wasn't going to work. But I could have done nothing else. We had failed in a way I could not countenance. Failed to protect Kimberly, the one person who wanted nothing more than to stop putting herself in harm's way, stop involving herself with magic, stop living with the threat of supernatural death hanging over her. Even as I readied the spring, coiled up my tentacles, and opened the valves of my bioreactor, I could see my leap would not land quickly enough. The hound was too fast. We were one step too slow. Kimberly's mouth opened in a scream. The hound shape lunged for her throat. Evelyn had accounted for this possibility. She had accounted for every possibility, every mistake, every vulnerability. My general, my genius. Preem stepped away from Evie's side and in front of Kimberly in one fluid motion, the black edges of her maid dress cutting the air like a bouquet of knives. Straight-backed, prim and proper, she didn't even bother to brace her feet. Preem had been included in the center of the circle, but not for Evelyn's comfort and convenience, she had been included because she was the best bodyguard a mage could ever ask for. Preem caught the hound's jaws on her forearm. Canine teeth cut through 3 layers of maid uniform fabric, sliced open 1 layer of pneumosomatic flesh, and stopped hard in wooden bones. The creature slammed to a sudden scrambling halt, furless muscles twitching, metal braces glinting, lean paws lashing. Maybe it had been a dog once, but nobody had time to think about that just then. Preem grabbed the creature's snout so hard that I heard bones fracture, a snap-crack-crackle of gut-wrenching breaks. It whined and squealed and tried to loosen its bite to let go of her arm, but she had it now. Everything around Preem and the hound was chaos. Kimberly was screaming as Felicity dragged her away, Evelyn was up on her feet and shouting directions to somebody, Sevens appeared and bizarrely enough decided to open her lilac umbrella in front of Evie. Rain was sprinting across the field. Twill was skidding to a halt just shy of Preem. The doll demon leaned in close to the hound, staring at the 2 patches of smooth flesh where the hound's eyes should have been. "Bad dog," she said. Then I slammed into the dog in a squirming mass of tentacles, ruining Preem's graceful victory and her one-liner. I'd been so panicked and so pumped full of adrenaline that I hadn't been able to abort my springing motion, not without kicking Zheng in the face and probably eating a mouthful of field. I dragged the dog thing to the ground in a tangle of strobing tentacles, gnashing teeth, scraping claws, and clods of mud going everywhere. Preem let go the moment I made contact, which is how she managed to stay perfectly on her feet. There was nothing heroic or even sensible about my late intervention. I was actually far less capable of dealing with a spooky mutant dog than Preem was. But between the initial tussle with the shambler in Edward's cottage, and springing up to Kimberly's bedroom window when AIM first arrived at our home, I had gotten far too familiar with using my tentacles to hurl myself at things. It was a terrible habit and was going to get me in trouble sooner or later. I needed to take lessons from Rain when to leap and when to look. The hound and I rolled, but it ended up on top. I had neither the body weight nor the experience for this kind of grappling on the ground. I twisted one knee in a groove of the circle, banged my head on the thankfully soft dirt, and ended up eating that mouthful of field which I'd been trying to avoid in the first place. The hound thing then attempted to eat a mouthful of heather, which I would not recommend unless one's name is Rain. Snapping jaws like an animatronic big bad wolf, inches from my face. Eyeless and noseless and smooth, robbed of all mundane senses. Slavering and dripping and hurling itself at my nest of tentacles. I pushed and slapped and slammed it in the head with tentacle tips, hissing and kicking. I was too far off my head on instinct and adrenaline to take the sensible option and just brainmat the beast over to Camelot, so a knight could run it through with a lance. Twill and Zheng pulled the thing off me in the end. It did not get a free sample of raw squid. Zheng broke its spine over her knee, then held it down while Rain put a bullet through the skull. It was not a pretty end. Panting, filthy, shocked beyond words. Kim was still naked though Felicity had whipped off her own coat and draped it over Kim's blood-soaked shoulders. Preem's sleeve was delicately shredded, but she didn't bleed. Rain had her gun out, sticking close to my side, saying nothing and watching the tree line. The bubble servitors, Cringewindla's angels, had come down in a triple-layered wall around us, as if embarrassed by their failure to stop the speeding intrusion. "Stop standing around!" Evelyn shouted, her voice raw and croaky, blood on her lips. "This changes nothing. Inside, now!" She jabbed her walking stick at the bleeding, twitching corpse of the unnatural hound construct. "And bring that inside. Tarpaulin, sheets, old t-shirts, I don't care what, get it indoors and on the kitchen tiles. Now! Move!" "What the hell are we even looking at?" asked Katie. "It doesn't look real." The stocky church bodyguard had untied and retied her dirty blonde ponytail 5 times in the last 10 minutes, pulling a face like she was examining a sculpture made of poo. She had also shed her baggy hoodie and dumped several weapons on the kitchen sideboard: 2 knives, a massive shiny revolver that was probably one of the most illegal things I'd ever seen, and an actual sword. The sword looked more like a prop piece from a movie about ancient Rome, but I wasn't about to go over and pull the stubby thing out of its black leather scabbard to find out. I wasn't that curious. "Halloween dog," suggested Nicole Webb. The detective was squatting down on her haunches, examining the corpse with incautious curiosity. She used a pen to poke and lever at various parts of the anatomy. "Whatever this is, it's not biologically possible. Poor thing should have been stumbling around, blind and deaf." "Poor thing," Katie said with a tut. It nearly took poor Heather's face off. We'd never live that down. I cleared my throat, feeling awkward. I could have just sent it elsewhere. I really should have. I wasn't thinking. Apparently that was the wrong thing to say. The church bodyguard, Katie, a woman who looked like she could eat nails for breakfast and then me for afters, looked at me with an expression of barely concealed awestruck terror. "You mean you really do that?" Twill said, "But she really can," Twill said, shooting us both a wink. "Scary, huh?" I pulled an awkward smile. "This isn't a dog," Nicole repeated. "I refuse to believe this is a dog." Evelyn sighed for the 50th time in the last hour. She was in the dining room, with the nice big fireplace and the sun streaming through the back windows, but we could hear her all the way over in the kitchen. She called out, "Stop trying to classify it by mundane standards, detective. You're only going to hurt your brain." Nicole snorted a little huff and shook her head. She muttered under her breath, "Impossible bullshit. I hate everything about this. It's not a dog." "Maybe it started as a dog," Katie said. She glanced at me again, near the rear of the kitchen, as if I would know. I smiled awkwardly and shrugged back. "Dog but modded. Mod dog. Yeah." She swallowed, nodding to herself, then glanced out of the kitchen window, craning her neck. "Yeah, that makes more sense. I can live with that." "Cool." Twill said, "That's not dog. It's imitation." Twill wore a barely suppressed grin, a bulging of the lips that told me she was desperately trying not to laugh. She was lounging by the fridge, eating scraps of meat from a packet of jerky. I didn't know how she could stand to eat in the same room as something freshly dead and horribly wrinkled, too much like her own snack food. Twill, absolutely straight-faced, said, "I think we can safely assume it's not a zombie." Katie looked like she wanted to hold Twill's face down in a toilet bowl. I assumed that line was another quote from a spooky movie that Katie didn't want to think about right now, locked in with a gruesome corpse and expecting a siege. Twill grinned and threw another piece of jerky into her own mouth, chewing loudly. "Try that and I'll give you an atomic wedgie." "Girls," came Christine Hopton's voice, also from the dining room, edged with strict warning. "Stop, please." Twill chewed through her grin. Katie shook her head, then returned to staring out of the window. "Pay attention," Evelyn called from the dining room. Watch the windows. Stop getting distracted. Detective, if you want to be useful, stop poking at the body and watch the tree line. Nicole Webb blew out a big sigh, stood up from her crouch, and then frowned at the end of the pen she'd been using to interfere with the corpse. Don't really want to put this back in my pocket. She turned with a half-hearted grin and offered it to me, Twill, and Katie. Anyone fancy a pen? Lightly soiled. Never used. Burn it, Katie said. The corpse of the hound thing lay spread out on the Hoptons' kitchen floor. Michael and Mr. George had located some old blue tarpaulin, then some slightly newer green tarpaulin, then put down a couple of animal blankets for good measure. Only then had Jing been allowed to dump the steaming body onto the makeshift containment. They needn't have bothered. Despite the gaping headshot and fist-sized exit wound from Rain's bullet, the dog construct had barely bled at all, as if its veins were filled with dust and scabs. A little watery red fluid had leaked onto the grass in the field and the tarmac out front, but there was only a tiny puddle of pale plasma and brain matter sitting on the tarpaulin. It also had no smell, which was creepy in a way I couldn't put my finger on. The nightmare hound was all too familiar, an amalgamation of disparate parts pressed into a canine shape. In a way, Twill was correct, it was not really dog at all. Parts of it were lizard, gray-green and shedding old skin. Other parts were thick hide, like a herd animal, a buffalo or a bison. The legs looked bird-like, spindly, but wrapped with metal braces and supporting struts, all well-oiled and greased. It had no eyes, no nostrils, and no ears, just a smooth expanse of hairless skull. The jaw looked as if it had come from a miniature crocodile. It was attached with metal hinges. The teeth were stainless steel. Rain and I had taken one look at the thing and both agreed we'd seen one before. What? Where? Evelyn had demanded, during those first few frantic minutes back indoors. I need to know, right now. Where did it come from? The looping corridor trap, Rain said. In Willow House. Remember that? When the Sherifford cult set a trap for you, but Heather and I blundered into it? Rain patted her thigh. I've still got a little scar from the bite. Preem, we're scar buddies now. I do not scar, said Preem. She had already rolled up her ruined sleeve and washed out the odd, bloodless wounds. Evelyn blinked, eyes far away for a moment. That was last year. We've not seen anything like this since then. Not even in the cult's castle. Edward Special, then, Michael Hopton suggested. His own private style. Right on, Dad, said Twill. I realized how alike she and her father really were. Rain nodded down at the hound thing. They had a dozen like that. Along with Zheng. Rain raised her voice, calling out of the kitchen to Zheng, who was lurking by the front door, watching the bubble servitors surround the house in protective layers. Hey, left hand. Come look, yeah. Zheng stalked in a moment later. Rain pointed at the corpse. Remember these, right? When we dueled. Hardly a duel. You had a lot of help. You know. Where they came from, back then. Puppets for a mage, Jing rumbled. She didn't even look at the corpse, her eyes were glued on any window she could find, watching the tree line beyond. I found it deeply reassuring, especially since I was still buzzing with adrenaline and covered in smears of mud. Eddie makes them? Rain asked. Jing shrugged. He brought them to the plan. They are his. That one is dead. Like I said, her father added. An Edward Special. Evelyn had spent a little while considering and investigating the dead hound. She had even forced herself to crouch down and look closer so she could sketch the thing, though the position put pressure on her hips and made her wince. I didn't like that. Casting the spell had taken a lot out of her and she wasn't even trying to pretend otherwise, or slow down. Preem had to help her with every step, help her stand up straight. She kept coughing blood, but thankfully that trailed off. At first I thought it might be an organic response to what we did with that spell, she said. Nothing to do with Edward at all. But it's not, it does belong to him. Which is better, actually, much better. How'd it get here so fast? Michael asked. It didn't, it must have already been on the way. Perhaps he already knew about us casting the spell, Evelyn mused, a dark frown on her brow. But that should be impossible. Traitor in our midst. Rain asked with a laugh, but nobody took that seriously. Is this it then? Twill asked. Everyone in earshot had gone quiet at that, to hear Evelyn's response. Is this his return fire? We done. Far from it, Evelyn replied. This is a scout, at best. Stick to the plan. We bunker down. Everybody to your places. Eyes on the windows. We'd been bunkered down inside Gearswin farmhouse for nearly an hour, behind locked and bolted and barred doors literally, in one case. Michael Hopton had broken out an antiquated-looking steel bar, taller than Zheng, which fitted into a pair of covertly placed brackets either side of the mostly glass back doors onto the patio. Bit much, innit, Dad? Twill had said. No chances, love, was his answer. We all saw how fast that dog moved. No sense in being sorry later. Evelyn had instructed us that nobody was to set foot outside, no window was to be opened by even a crack, and no door left untended. The first few minutes of our retreat indoors had been a mayhem of to-ing and fro-ing as we'd all piled in with Zheng carrying the corpse. Preem helped Evelyn, who was still coughing up clots of blood. Felicity too, staggering along under her own power and spitting into a handkerchief, even as she helped Kimberly and herded her in through the front door. The bubble servitors had followed us to the walls of the house, contracting in a fortified ring and leaving the rest of the farm bare, though I was relieved to see 3 angels squatting on top of the brick and sheet metal stables, to look out for the sheep and alpaca. Felicity and Christine had worked together to take Kimberly upstairs without getting blood all over the carpets. Poor Kim was shivering, teeth chattering, eyes wild with adrenaline and fear. We could all hear water splashing into a bathtub upstairs. Lozzie was on the case already. Nicole had politely watched them go, and not with the expression of a woman who was trying to catch a glance of the naked body of somebody she fancied. After the initial confusion, the hurrying back and forth along the corridors, the triple checking of windows, the stowing of weapons, and the sight of Preem forcing Evelyn to sit down and drink a glass of water, the house slowly settled into an expectant waiting. There were a few tasks to take care of, double-checking the magic circle wards which Evie had placed before all of the doors into the house, getting myself cleaned up, the mud wiped off my face and my hoodie, making sure that everybody had their modified pneumosomatic seeing glasses ready. Of course we checked the corpse of the dog, but that was really the only distraction. Most of this here motley crew, as Rain put it, took up the process of wandering from window to window in a slow circuit of the house. All eyes stayed on the tree line, the driveway, the shadows at the edge of the forest. Glances were shared in passing. One or another person would stop before a window. Rain here, Michael Hopton there, Zheng looming large against the front door outlined by the crisp, sharp sunlight, dark silhouettes, watching. Once Evie was settled and no longer coughing up blood, Preem set about making tea and passing out mugs. A scrap of domestic comfort went a long way. It really does feel a bit like a castle under siege, I murmured to Rain. We were standing together in the little sitting room off the right side of the main spinal corridor. She was leaning against the corner of the bookcase and looking through the mostly glass door in the side of the house, so she could watch the driveway and a sliver of road beyond. That's exactly what it is, she said, then flashed a grin without looking at me. Enjoying it much? Not really, I sighed. Castles should be more picturesque than this. Rain pulled a comedy wince. Don't let Twill's mum hear you say that. She's pretty house-proud, I think. Her expression shifted as she pulled her attention away from the driveway and looked at me. A twinkle glinted in the depths of those rich brown eyes, warm and soft. That was real brave of you out there, Heather. I sighed and blushed, dropping my voice. Really stupid, more like. Please don't flatter me, Rain. It wasn't needed. I should have let Preem deal with it. I don't have to be everybody's angel all of time. You're my angel 100% of the time. She winked, then leaned forward quickly and planted a kiss on my forehead, running a hand through my hair. Rain. I squeaked, blushing far too hard. I'm still dirty from rolling around outdoors. I sighed and tried to smooth my hair down. I needed a bath too. I felt such a sense of responsibility to Kim. We all have a responsibility to her. She didn't have to volunteer for this. And she's got work on Monday morning, just like usual. Going from this to back to normal, it's hard. Maybe impossible. Rain's smile turned deeply warm, as if she saw something in my eyes that I wasn't aware of. You're right, Heather. We do have a responsibility to her. Good call. I sighed again and leaned my forehead against Rain's arm for a moment. I think I'll go see her and say thank you. Bet she'd love that. Kim trusts you a lot, you know. Are you being serious? 100%. Always. You know me. Do you think she's out of the bathroom yet? I glanced up at the ceiling, as if I could somehow see through brick and plaster and paint and tell if Kimberly was decent yet. Don't hear anybody moving around again or refilling the tub, which means she's either done, or she's fallen asleep in the water. Fliss should be on hand to stop that though. I frowned at Rain as an unspeakable thought ghosted through my mind. You don't think Felicity was well, because Kimberly was naked, in the bath, and... Rain shook her head emphatically. Nah. I went up to check. Fliss was on guard outside the bathroom door. We got enough shit to worry about without something like that happening. Fliss is weird as hell, but she's not that. I blew out a slightly embarrassed breath. Okay, fair enough, I'm sorry. Hey, no need to apologize. You're looking out for everybody. It's good. My initial question was a fair one. It had obviously taken quite a lot of effort for Kim to wash off all that blood. We'd heard the bathtub fill and empty 3 times over, interspersed with a lot of creaking floorboards, the sound of somebody moving about, and 2 long periods of water glugging through the pipes to feed the shower. Kimberly had been coated head to toe in bull's blood. I was surprised she hadn't asked to be scoured down with steel wool. Despite seeing the Hoptons' home quite extensively once before, both in nightmarish parody and by the light of day, I had never actually mounted the narrow, carpeted stairs up to the 2nd floor. So out I went, past the tasteful paintings of alpine views, past Katie watching another window and exchanging some quiet words with Amanda Hopton, past Jing lurking just inside the front door where I paused to touch her hand, and she responded by ruffling my hair, and up the stairs I went. The upper floor of Gearswin farmhouse was much the same as the first floor, unreconstructed, untouched by the cruel hand of modern interior design, never remodeled. Bare beams, old plaster, even some exposed water pipes for the radiators fed by the massive exposed wood boiler downstairs. I approved deeply. The only downside was that the corridor was kinked, cramped, and a bit low, not a problem for somebody of my height, but I did wonder if Michael Hopton ever bumped his head on his own bedroom door frame. My tentacles instantly attached themselves to the walls and ceiling, eager to pull me along like a squid in a tube. I resisted the urge, as I didn't want poor Kimberly or perhaps Felicity to step out of a room and see me hurling down the corridor. They'd both had trials enough for one day. The corridor formed a stubby little T-junction in the top of the house, cradling several bedrooms and one surprisingly large bathroom. I poked my head inside the open door of the bathroom and spent a moment admiring the absolutely gigantic claw-footed tub. It looked about 80 years old and could have easily contained Jing, Rain, and me all at once. I banished that thought. Now was not the time, Heather. Not the time, sadly. The air in the bathroom still held a little steamy heat. The mirror was still fogged. A cluster of bathroom cleaning products sat at one end of the room, the kind Of bottles which usually lived under a sink, like I had witnessed the rare emergence of a cave-dwelling species. Somebody had dutifully cleaned the bath itself, leaving behind no trace of blood. Felicity's coat sat in a bucket of cold water, to wash out the worst of the bloodstains, looking rather sad and wet. To locate the others, I simply followed the sound of video games. I found Sevens first, standing at the window at one end of the T-junction. It afforded her a perfect vantage point across the back fields, one of which was scarred and scored with the mud runnels of the magic circle we had carved earlier. The canvas still lay in the middle, covered in blood, inert now. Seven Shades of Suitable Sentry did not glance back over her shoulder as I approached. Low voices and the sounds of controller buttons came from the other end of the corridor, but I chose to go to her first. Sevens, I said, stopping next to her. The princess mask, so starched and straight-backed, umbrella rolled up and held like a prop walking stick in one hand, granted me a sideways shift of unreadable eyes. Kitten. I sighed, but with a smile. If I'm a kitten, what does that make you? A hawk. Hardly. I laughed. Where's Aim gotten to? I must admit I'm slightly nervous about her running around unattended again. She has gone to inspect the woods. Oh. I bit my lip. Evie did say we should all stay indoors. Aim's unique nature allows her to inspect the woods while remaining indoors. Sevens answered by talking to the window, not to me. So she's not here, not right now, not really. Seven Shades of Spiky Standoff shot me another inching sideways look. For some reason my shoulder blades itched. I crept tentacles behind me and behind Sevens, like an early warning system, in case Aim was about to sneak up on us and go boo. Why do you ask that specific question, kitten? I made myself look like an absolute fool by glancing down the corridor behind us, as if worried about eavesdroppers. Because I haven't had any of you to myself for several days. Not that I'm claiming any right to you or something. I blushed a little and pulled an increasingly awkward smile. Just that a hug would be nice. You can wear the vampire mask if you'd rather not crease your nice smart blouse. Oh. A tiny squeak of surprise escaped my lips as Sevens turned precisely 90 degrees and enveloped me in a sudden crushing hug. The yellow princess ruined the neat creases and crisp lines of her white blouse, and fatally disturbed the ruler-straight sheet of her blonde hair. She squeezed me as if trying to pull me into her chest, which was, I will admit, quite pleasant, though I was too surprised to fully enjoy it. I hugged her back as best I could, suddenly very self-conscious of my hands and my tentacles messing up her aesthetic. After what felt like minutes she finally let me go. She had not lifted me off my feet, but the way she set me back a pace or two made it feel that way regardless. I was suddenly breathless, flushed in the face, a little ruffled. The yellow princess betrayed no emotion, but her clothes were just that tiny bit out of place, blouse askew, hair less than perfect. Oh, Sevens, I'm sorry, you're all mussed up. I reached for her blouse. Why, I have no idea. I was not exactly good at this sort of thing. Any attempt to straighten things out would likely leave them worse than if I hadn't tried at all. Seven Shades of Sudden Snuggles caught my wrist in one hand. Sevens. She held me there for a heartbeat, staring at my eyes. Then, leave your mark on me, beloved. We stayed there like that for several long seconds. I waited for more, heart pounding in my chest. Seven stared into my eyes as if expecting to find terrible sadness there. She was like a statue, rock solid, absolutely still. I wondered for a moment if she had vacated the mask, left it empty, an echoing vessel. Sevens. I murmured eventually. Are you? You want me to? No, I chided myself very gently. This wasn't how Seven Shades of Sunlight worked. I tried again. Sevens, are you wearing the wrong mask right now? I wish to monopolize a fraction of your attention, she said. I wish to claim what is mine. Okay, I said, which was a terrible thing to say because it said nothing. Then I swallowed hard and tried to stop glowing like a light bulb. Well, I'm here right now. I was going to check on Kim, but there's no crisis, not yet, I've got time for you. I added in a hurry, I mean, I've always got time for you. You only have to ask. I think that's how it works. Time in the opening of a siege, Seven said. Locked in together. What better moment to face inward? I sighed. It's hardly a siege. Might turn out that nothing happens. All a bit anticlimactic. Sevens let go of my wrist. She caressed it as she let go, so I pulled it away very slowly. She said, I am being unreasonable. I don't think you are. You've been stuck with AIM for several days and... I have not been stuck with AIM, said the princess. She is sweet on the inside. Soft. A little bitter. I wish I had been there, in my prior years, when she had needed guidance. I'm glad you and her are getting along. I think. Gosh, this is very strange. It's like you two come from the same place and have things in common that you and I don't. Is that jealous of me? Do you want to feel jealous? I don't really. I'm more interested in how you feel, Sevens. The yellow princess stared at me for several heartbeats, then turned away to stare out of the window again. The sunlight dusted the sharp lines of her face, her smooth cheeks, her clear eyes. I feel unmoored, kitten. This is not your fault. Well, I'm going to remoor you, I said. Then I reached up and tucked a lock of her already messed up hair behind one of her ears. It didn't suit the shape of her face or the look of her hair, not one bit. But she turned her head and blinked at me. If I'm an angel, I said. If I'm going to be an angel, if I'm going to define myself that way to help deal with all the nonsense that flows around me, then I have to be that to you, too. So if you feel unmoored, you can come to me. Seven stared, then nodded, then returned to looking out of the window. I touched her fingers, she touched mine. I stayed there for a minute or two, staring out at the dark tree line and hoping nothing showed up. Then we parted for now and I padded down the corridor in my socks, following the sounds of video games and the soft murmur and trill of familiar voices. Twill's bedroom was at the opposite end of the corridor, next to a matching window which looked out over the trees next to the driveway. I paused for a moment to peer down at the slip of visible road and up at the rustling treetops, thinking about zombified pigeons and magically reanimated mosquitoes. But nothing moved except the grass in the wind and the vague oily blobs of the bubble servitors. All was quiet. Perhaps we were waiting for nothing. I poked my head gingerly around the door of Twill's bedroom. Hello, everyone. Just here to check. Hi. Hello. BR, went Tenny, without looking around from the telly. Twill waved me in. Big H. Come join. We're about to get totally mullered here, 'cause Tenny doesn't understand the first thing about football. BRT. Tenny trilled again. Tentacles were flickering, and Tenny were twitching, somebody was very frustrated. I crept over the threshold and into exactly the kind of room I expected Twill to cultivate. Despite the low ceilings and narrow corridors, the upstairs rooms of Gearswin farmhouse were large and airy. Twill's room had the same exposed beams and bare plaster look as the rest of the house, but she'd painted the plaster a soft, cool blue and covered the beams in junk, video game cases, loose books, a primary school sports trophy, a rugby ball with a spike through it. I reminded myself to ask if there was a story behind that one and a dozen other pieces of personal bric-a-brac. The walls in between were covered in posters of all kinds, bands, movie posters, pages ripped straight out of old video game magazines. I spotted weird movie monsters and spooky landscapes, footballers and rugby players I could not have named if somebody had threatened me, cartoon characters and anime characters and even a couple of Evelyn's colorful ponies. Above Twill's narrow bed was a 3D poster of a werewolf, in pride of place. Laminated corners curling, printed in that green and red 3D style that hadn't been in fashion since the 90s, I had the sudden flash of insight that it had been above her bed for a very long time indeed. Two narrow windows at the far end provided woefully little light, but she had a pair of standing lamps casting a warm glow on the low ceiling and spilling back down onto the rest of the room. On one side was a narrow bed, covers neatly made, tucked in, pillows forming a sensible bulge at one end. At its foot was a large and overflowing dresser, proving that Twill loved clothes but had little ability to organize them. The top was stacked with all sorts of junk, more clothes, more books, old mugs in need of being taken downstairs. Hand cream, a takeaway menu, a plush albatross as big as AIM, a tower of empty tissue boxes which made me wince, and what I'm quite certain was a dirty magazine, which should not have been left visible while Tenny was in the room. The desk past the dresser surprised me. Beneath the window, so it got the best light, absolutely piled with textbooks and schoolwork and well-thumbed notepads, it was organized to perfection. Twill had ring binders and post-it notes, colored separators and a mug of highlighters. She had 3 calculators and a reading lamp. A reading lamp. Sometimes it was easy to forget that Twill was academically speaking incredibly driven and quite smart. Twill herself was perched on the end of the bed, so she could watch the action unfolding on the telly which dominated the opposite side of the room, currently wearing the grin of a blood-mad football hooligan. Kimberly and Lozzie were sat on the bed behind her. I had expected Kimberly to look like hell, probably shell-shocked, maybe in need of a very big hit from one of her special hand-rolled cigarettes. I wouldn't have blamed her, she'd stripped naked and been drenched in bull's blood in front of everybody, then come within inches of being killed by a rip-off Hammer horror mutant dog. But Kim was glowing. She was wearing clothes borrowed from Twill, a bright orange t-shirt and a pair of pajama bottoms, and wrapped in a large fluffy green dressing gown which I guessed belonged to Christine Hopton. She was scrubbed and pink from the bath, with huge bags under her eyes. And she was smiling like I'd never seen her smile before. It wasn't a grin or a smirk, but something subtle and deep. The smile reached all the way up to her eyes and made their corners crinkle. She wasn't even smiling at anything in particular. Lozzie was just behind her and in the process of kneading the muscle knots out of Kim's shoulders, but she didn't seem lost in physical bliss. She was simply here, present, surrounded by others. Felicity was sat more distant, on the cheap swivel chair in front of Twill's desk. She looked shell-shocked and exhausted and drained, back bent, feet flat on the floor. Without her coat she was thinner, more unhealthy, wrapped in an old jumper and jeans. I felt a bizarre urge to make sure she ate something. Sitting cross-legged on the floor next to the bed, video game controller in her hands, face pinched in a frown, tentacles wiggling and waggling with hard concentration, was Tenny. I couldn't make any sense of the rows of numbers and statistics on the screen. "Well," I said in reply to Twill. "I don't know anything about football either." "You're not teasing Tenny, are you?" "Football," Tenny trilled. She pressed buttons and made some numbers switch around on the screen. "Nah." Twill laughed. "We're playing Football Manager." "Well, Tenny's playing, and losing." "Boo," went Tenny, pouting. Twill leaned forward and ruffled her fluffy white hair, careful to avoid jostling her antennae. Tenny made a frustrated noise and navigated through a series of menus, which included pitch diagrams, player positions, and a very authentic-looking team shirt, in bright red. "Are you meant to be watching a window?" I asked Twill. "Nah. Mom said to take a break, watch Kim." Twill shrugged. Kimberly spoke up, much to my surprise. Her voice was light and airy, a smile in her words. "Oh, I don't understand anything about football either. I've never even seen a real game. But Tenny is very enthusiastic." She blinked slowly, eyelids heavy, feet stretched out on the bed. She scrunched her toes and sighed. I caught Lozzie's eye and glanced at Felicity too, frowning a silent question at both of them in turn. Just behind Kim's sightline, Lozzie shook her head and mouthed sober. Felicity shrugged, too tired to say anything. Others had been up here to check on Kimberly, of course, I wasn't the first or only. Preem and Christine had both made sure she was well, Preem had even reported back to Evie. Neither of them had mentioned that Kimberly looked like she'd downed a fistful of codeine. Kim. I ventured softly, walking over to join them on the bed. Kim, how are you feeling now? Tenny pressed a button and a football match started up on the telly, virtual crowd murmuring to itself as the simulated players got started. Kimberly's eyes wandered from the screen and found me, lazy and slow. Not bad, she said. Considering. I eased myself down on the bed. If you don't mind me saying, you seem a little abstracted. Hi, she said. You mean I seem like I'm high? I glanced at the back of Tenny's head. She didn't seem to have noticed, too focused on the video game. I'm not sure we should talk about that in front of certain people. Lozzie, leaning over Kimberly's shoulders, did a funny little bounce on the bed, making everybody wobble. Tens knows what drugs are. I taught her all the things, Heathy. Yeah, Twill added without looking over her shoulder. She was glued to the fake football match too, which seemed to be just random highlights. Knowledge is always better than ignorance. Better the devil you know, all that. Felicity spoke heavily from the rear of the room. She was watching the match too, vague and uninterested. Better not to know the devil at all. I struggled not to pull a grimace, knowing what I knew about Felicity's personal history with addictive pharmaceuticals. Perhaps she was trying to share a piece of wisdom, but between her tone and her scarred half-mumble it came off as especially grim and grisly. Well, I said awkwardly, smiling back at Kim. You do seem very happy. She shook her head. I don't know why. Endorphins, Felicity added, low and serious. Survivor's high. I've told her a dozen times already. She looked over to me with a sort of sympathetic sigh on her half-burned face, then dropped her eyes, almost ashamed. Sorry. Nah, you've got a point, Twill said. She hadn't seen the look. Brush with death, makes you feel alive. I do feel alive, Kim said. I feel like I want to go on a bike ride, or something. Oh, that sounds so lame. I mean I want to do something exciting. Something I normally wouldn't do. I nodded along. You deserve it. If there's anything me and Evie and the others, I mean if there's anything we can do, anywhere we can take you, let us know. Kimberly blinked. Her eyes were shining, but her smile dribbled off, replaced with a slow-struck awl. I didn't like that look, it had too much in common with the way Badger looked at me. Kim, I added quickly, trying to head that off before she said something to make me cringe. Thank you. What you did today, nobody else was ready to do. You didn't have to. Thank you. You've done a lot for me. And it is for me, I'm not going to pretend it isn't. Twill snorted a laugh. Getting rid of Eddie is gonna be good for everybody. Well, yes, I said. That too. Kim reached out and brushed my elbow with her fingers. I almost wrapped a tentacle around her hand on instinct, but managed to stop at the last moment, mostly because Lozzie poked the tentacle in question. Oh, no, Kim was saying now she had my attention. Her lower lip was wobbling slightly. Thank you, Heather. So much. For leaping to my rescue. You're too good to me. You're all too good to me. I cringed through a smile. I didn't need to leap like that. The others had it all under control. Thank Preem instead. I did. Kimberly nodded. Preem, I love Preem. She's been so kind. Nice. She's just always there. You know when I can't sleep, she knocks on my door sometimes. She's so sweet. Her eyes were growing wet and scrunched as she spoke. I love Evie too. I'd be on the streets without her, I really would, I never would have gotten that job. Kim sniffed hard. Lozzie patted her shoulder with flaps of her pastel poncho. And it worked. The spell worked. I hope we find Edward, that old guy. Thing. Get that book. Get your sister. I'd like to meet her. Kimberly was crying now, holding herself right on the verge of tears. Everyone else had gone awkwardly quiet, embarrassed by this slow and heartfelt outburst of raw emotion. Two of Tenny's silken black tentacles had crept up to clutch Kim's left leg, but that was all. Only Lozzie knew how to respond, scooting around and giving Kimberly somebody to hug. Kim responded without thinking, clinging to Lozzie. Flowsy, Flowsy, Lozzie murmured, a little sing-song. You were always such a dummy. Dumbo dummy deuce. I don't deserve that name, she murmured into Lozzie's shoulder. I hadn't heard Lozzie call Kimberly Flowsy in months, the private name from their time in the Sherriford cult. I was reminded, once again, that these two had known each other long before I'd known either of them. When we had first dragged Kimberly out of the cult's castle alongside us, Lozzie had declared that she didn't care if Flowsy lived or died. Now she was giving her a shoulder to cry on. Felicity managed to look most awkward of all. She caught my eye and pulled a grimace. Survivor's high, she whispered again. It'll pass. You were beautiful, Kimberly was saying, one eye watching me over Lozzie's shoulder. You and Zheng. Zheng. I knew her for years, big frightening monster, and she was running, for me. And Preem. Kimberly's eyes fluttered shut. There is a beauty in magic. There is. There can be. She trailed off to nothing, breathing softly into Lozzie's shoulder. Maybe she'd fallen asleep. Twill cleared her throat gently. The simulated football match on the television had gone to penalties. Hope you're not talking about that bloody great hole in the ground, she said. Wouldn't call that beautiful myself. Twill, I said. Language. Tenny's here. Oh shit. Twill clapped a hand to her mouth. I mean, sugar. Bloody is a bad word, Tenny trilled, sing-song style. Lozzie giggled, setting a very bad example. Please don't tell Evie, okay? Twill said. And don't repeat that word. It's bad. Rude. A rude word, alright Tens. I'm not rude, Tenny said, all a flutter. Felicity spoke as if she hadn't heard the last few moments of conversation, untouched by levity. That breach was unexpected, she said. I didn't have to ask for clarification to know she was talking about the gigantic void which had opened in the ground, out in the field, the impossible sucking hole in reality. Was that normal? I asked. Felicity looked up. The bags were heavy beneath her eyes. She always had such a haunted look, even below the exhaustion. There's nothing normal about what we've done here. We did real magic. Large scale. We changed something about the arrangement of reality. That's not going to go unnoticed, and not just by this Edward guy. I froze, staring at her. Are you saying we've opened ourselves up to additional danger? Felicity shrugged. I don't know. I try to keep my head down, most of the time. This is the first in a while I've broken that habit. She raised her gloved hands, either to check herself or to show them to me. Both of them were shaking with anxiety. I haven't had a chance to talk to Evie about it, not yet, I said. Everything has been so hectic. But I doubt she would countenance something which would create even more danger, not these days. Even if she was reckless when you knew her, she's not that way anymore. She's got much more to live for. Felicity returned her hands to her lap, linking her fingers to hide the shaking. That's good to know. Good to hear. She has seemed driven. She was always driven, I mean. I'm sorry. Forget I said anything, forget. Sweeties and sweetums, crooned a voice made of rusty knives and the smell of melted plastic. Don't look now, but somebody's stolen our horizon. All eyes including Kimberly's, which snapped open, looked to the doorway. Aim stood there like the spooky little sprite she was, head to toe in black lace, hood up, voice coming from a dark oval of nothing. Aim. Felicity said instantly, not missing a beat. Explain. Right now. Aim giggled, a noise like nails pattering on a blackboard. Down the corridor, Seven's shoes went click 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 until she joined Aim in the doorway. The Yellow Princess was a mask of self-control. Aim is not exaggerating, she said. You should see. Tenny, stay here. Lozzie, watch her. Shouts of surprise and alarm were coming from the bottom floor of the house. Evelyn was calling my name. Rain was shouting to look at it through the glasses, use the glasses. It's not just the dogs. Across the field, beyond the farm, the tree line was full of hounds. Maybe a dozen creatures similar to the dead one downstairs, pacing back and forth, staring at the house with sightless eyes or mismatched orbs. Dark shapes hung in the trees, avoiding the sunlight, heavy and hanging like lumpy and unnatural sloths. And above it all, forming a new skyline, dwarfing farmhouse and trees and all, was a spider servitor the size of an oil rig. I used to have fantasies about being trapped in a siege. In the early days after the eye took Maisie away, but not so early that I was screaming at every unnatural shadow and twisted spirit creature, not so early that I was a sobbing, inconsolable wreck, not so early that every fantasy was a dark warm place and my sister returned to me. An imaginary siege was one of the fantasies which I retreated to for comfort, for safety, for security inside the soot-marked, crater-pocked palace of my own mind. A decent psychologist could probably get a thesis or two out of that, if their training and worldview survived the transition to being in the know. A young girl retreats inside a mental fortress and imagines everything outside herself as a besieging army. That's how it felt in the early days. Except the enemy was already inside the castle, leaning over my shoulder and screaming mathematics into my ear. It was always on the worst nights at Signet Children's Hospital, the ones when spirits had wandered into my bedroom and wouldn't leave, when I couldn't tell if the nighttime noises were coming from the other children or from things I couldn't see, when I missed home and my parents, when I rejected the judgment that I was mentally unwell, when I missed Maisie enough to sob her name into the pillow. On those nights I would snuggle down in bed. The sheets and pillows at Signet really were very high quality, and I would conjure up a castle. Never a fanciful fairy tale castle, never the sort of sugar-spun spires and banners that Maisie and I together might have enjoyed. I required a fortress, a bastion, or at least my childhood concept of one. Thick walls, blunt corners, great big bolt throwers on blocky towers, gates made of adamantium. I'd read that word somewhere and I rather liked it barred and barricaded. Layers and layers of walls, each one overlooking the last. I'd read about that somewhere too, but I couldn't recall where. I couldn't clearly recall much in those days. My fantasies were vague about the defenders' knights of some kind, it didn't matter, and about the besiegers. Sometimes I would imagine the besieging army was all the bizarre and horrible monsters I saw everywhere, my hallucinations, but that often made me more upset, made it harder to sleep, ended with me working myself into a panic, even huddled under the covers with my eyes closed. Maisie was always there. Of course she was, that was half the point. Tucked away alongside me in some secret inner keep, looking out of a window together, with a big roaring fire and lots of food and books and a nice big bed and guards right outside the doors. Our guards, our safety. When I grew up a bit and understood myself a little better, I would sometimes add other girls too. Nobody specific, I didn't have an imaginary girlfriend, I just liked the idea of being cozy and safe alongside nice girls who I could cuddle up to. With everything I'd learned since then. If I'd ever had an imaginary girlfriend, I'd probably confess it to Evie, so she could put me in a magic circle to check I hadn't been compromised somehow. Imaginary girls were likely vectors for the eye. Sieges were comfort food for my young imagination, but now I was in the middle of the genuine article. No Maisie, no thick walls, no nice safe room with a roaring fire and books and a bed. But I did have the girlfriends, no less than 3 of them, of varying kinds from Rain through Zhang and all the way to Sevens. And Evie, of course, though this was hardly the time for that, even if she did fit the type from my old childhood fantasies. But this was not the kind of siege during which one could snuggle down in bed and fall asleep. Down on the ground floor of Gearswin farmhouse, everyone was talking at once, peering out of the windows, rushing between doors, shouting and gesticulating and losing their heads. Glasses on. You can't see it without the glasses. You've summoned a kaiju. That's a kaiju out there. Twill you arse, you've jinxed us with horror movie bullshit. I knew you lot would be the death of me. Gave you the chance to leave, detective. We're perfectly safe indoors. Hey, breathe, okay. Look, there's a wall of cringe-dog soap bubble friends between us and that bloody great spider. They could bury it, no problem. We're safe. Right, Amanda? Cringe-dog. Hey, it's a pet name. I mean it with affection. Heather says he's sweet, so he's sweet. Any friend of hers and all that. I trust the blob monsters. Yeah, good luck running. You saw how fast the hounds were. That's what guns are for. Spider. A servitor that size is not a one-mage undertaking. I should know. My own attempts never get that far. This is impossible. Cringe-Windla doesn't approve. Agree. He does not like this spider. This is he won't. I don't understand, I don't. Amanda, breathe, close your eyes, focus. You know how it gets when he thinks too fast. Sit down, let him direct his angels. Let him take us in his hands. He will protect us. He always does. Sit, now. That's it, sit down. Shaman. Jing rumbled a greeting as I joined her at the glass doors at the front of the sitting room, the ones which led out onto the patio, with a wide view of the fields beyond, the fences, the magic circle weed carved into the dirt, and the sun-shivered tree line which ringed the farm. I shielded my eyes against the bright and glinting sunlight. I peered out and up and up, and up, at Edward Lilburn's response to our assault. Behind us the chaos was only getting worse. What does this mean? What does it mean, hey? Does this mean we can get to Eddie's house now? It means it is no longer concealed. The way is clear. That's a kaiju. I don't know if you've seen many giant monster movies, but this is not exactly a defensible position, you twat. Spider. Cute. We're safe. Trust Evie's judgment. And hey, trust your God, right? He's not infallible. I trust Cringe-Windla. I trust him absolutely. The hell? Ben, you never say that shit. Don't freak out on me, come on. I am terrified. I'm not ashamed. You get terrified in combat. It's okay. It's okay. It's too big. Miss Say, please, I would like to put forward a serious evacuation plan. This is far more than we expected. Cringe-Windla is powerful and he can defend this house, but I would rather that spider not put a leg through our roof. Tiles need replacing anyway, Dad. Spider. Spider. Itsy bitsy. I can take the dogs out from the window. Or I could, if we had an actual rifle, scoped. Even small caliber. They drop with one in the brain, like anything else alive. The dogs aren't the problem. Are those sloths in the trees? I can see them without the glasses. Big ol lumpy weirdos. BRT. Take her back upstairs, Lozzie, please. She's afraid. Come with me, Tens. Everything is going to be safe. I promise I will look after you. Lozzie too, take my other hand. Everything is not going to be safe after this. Miss Say, you are basically in charge. It's taking a step forward. It's slow. It's big. Evelyn's voice suddenly cut through the cacophonous madness, it's a bluff. Her stony confidence stopped everybody panicking and talking over each other for a moment, which was a nice change. I even turned away from the window to look back at her, and found her blazing like a lit torch. Up on her feet despite the draining difficulty of the earlier spell, all her weight on her prosthetic and her walking stick, flinty blue eyes staring past me and past the fields and up at the spider servitor towering over the woodland canopy. She was so certain, so absolutely unbowed. It was beautiful. Everybody else, all except for myself and Zheng, were caught in a frozen tableau. Preem was supporting Evie's other arm. Michael Hopton had been in the process of appealing for retreat, directly to Evie. His wife, Christine Hopton, was tending to a flushed and dazed Amanda, struggling with the demands and fears of her god, Hrinjwindla. Katie, the spare bodyguard, looked terrified, though she was clutching her revolver. Benjamin Hopton was drawn and grey, like a soldier listening to an incoming shell. Mr. George, who I'd figured out was Katie's father, was chewing the end of an unlit cigarette. Twill was grinning, but the grin didn't reach her eyes, craning to see the spider and the escorts at the far end of the field. Rain was a rock, unmoved by any of this, not a single hint of doubt in her face, but I could tell from the way she stood and the way she angled her body that she was vibrating to scoop me up and haul me to the car and drive away. Nicole Webb was taking slow, deep breaths, arms folded, watching the tree line past the spider. Felicity looked grim, set, like she'd seen all this before and knew it was going to end in disaster. She'd also slid closer to Evelyn, which surprised me. Down in the spinal corridor, Sevens and Aim were leading Lozzie and Tenny back to the stairs. Kimberly was peering around the door. I longed to tell her to go away, forget all this, because her task was done. She'd given enough. Every baseline human had a pair of modified glasses on their face, some with the silly 3D blue and red, some just plain black frames. Nicole was looking over the rims of hers, checking reality against pneumosomatic truth. Evie, I said. Our eyes met and she nodded. A bluff, I'm certain. Heather, look at the legs. Look closely. Even I can see it from here and I've not exactly got the best eyesight in the world. I turned back to the doors and pressed my face to the glass. Behind me, voices rose again, the chaos resuming as uncertainty returned, but then Jing rumbled like an angry volcano. The shaman must concentrate. Quiet. Thanks, Jing, I murmured. Twill tooted. Didn't have to say it like that, she muttered. Shoo, went Preem. Spider. The spider servitor towered over the farm, the house, and treetops alike. The underbelly of its main body cleared the canopy by maybe a dozen feet. If it had been real flesh rather than pneumosomatic matter, one could have seen the thing all the way over in Brinkwood. We were exceptionally lucky that everybody in that house was in the know. I suspected that this introduction to the supernatural might go poorly for anybody who'd ever seen a Godzilla movie. But it wasn't quite like one of Evie's spiders. It was very tall and very large, like a walking oil rig, much larger even than the ancient, exhausted, battle-scarred spider servitor that we'd seen down on the Say estate in Sussex, the last and greatest survivor of Evelyn's grandmother's generation. It was plated in the same black chitin, but smooth and unblemished, reflecting the sunlight in a glinting sheen of beetle black. Yet it lacked the crystalline head of the smaller servitors, instead sporting just a black and featureless faceplate. It had no bank of swaying stingers, no heat exchanger vents on its back, nothing but the body and the head and the legs. And the legs were thin and spindly, angular and steep, as if based more on a crane fly than a wolf spider. The spider took another step forward as I watched, edging into the field and out of the woods. No stingers, no eyes. I said. It's not the same as the ones your family made in the past, I can see that, The legs, Heather. Look. Confirm for me, please. Somebody else, too. Twill, you have good eyes. Look. Oh. I lit up with sudden realization. One of the back legs is sticking right through a tree. Like a spirit, going through a wall. Evelyn blew out a sigh of relief. Then you see it too. It's not a servitor. Not a true one. Yup, said Twill. It's moving that leg now, but yeah, there it goes, right through the tree. Without touching it. It's not real. Evelyn raised her chin and declared, it can't touch this house. That thing is a bluff. Felicity made a sound like sucking her teeth. Doesn't look right. Not to me. Miss Say, Evelyn, said Christine Hopton, polite but with an undercurrent of terrible urgency. Not all of us here are used to the spirit world and its denizens. What do you mean by, it can't touch this house? Forgive us our ignorance, but we are all a little scared by that. Kaiju, Katie supplied. Also yeah, we don't get this. How exactly are we safe from that? For all her energetic angry terror, Katie couldn't help but notice that several of us had calmed down significantly, myself, Twill, Rain, Evelyn, even Nicole Webb. Mr. George put a tobacco-stained hand on his daughter's shoulder, which helped further. Twill laughed at her. It's like a ghost. Can't touch us. Spirit, not servitor. Don't ask me though, Evie's the expert. I half expected Evelyn to huff and grumble and refuse to explain, but she nodded curtly to the Hoptons and the other members of the church before rattling it off in the most concise way I could have imagined. There are 3 kinds of pneumosomatic flesh. The first is naturally occurring. Pneumosomatic life, spirits, they're made of that stuff. It can't touch us or do anything to us, passes through matter most of the time. Don't ask me how they touch the ground. The second type is artificial, made by mages or gods, I suppose. Servitors, your bubble angels, they can touch things, but they can't be seen with normal methods. That spider out there just walked through a tree. It's not a true servitor. If it was, it would have shook the forest as it had moved. Would have seismographs shaking all over the north. It's just a spirit. Michael Hopton asked with a gentle frown, you said 3 kinds. What's the third? Hello, said Preem. The type you can both touch and see with normal eyes, yes, Evelyn said. Rare, impossible. Demon only. Never mind about that right now. She gestured at the spider with her walking stick. The spider is a bluff. It can't do anything to us. Rain cleared her throat. Sorry to burst the bubble, but what if it's like Marmite? What? Evelyn snapped. Marmite, said Mr. George. I think he'd just decided we were all mad. Marmite, Rain explained to Evie. The spirit which Edward hijacked to mess with Stack's kid. He's a spirit, but Edward made him more, right? And he phased through the roof to get away, ignored regular matter when it suited him, but could touch it at other times. Rain nodded out the window. The spider was taking another step into the field. What if that thing out there is the same? Several nervous glances crisscrossed the room. Miss Say, said Michael Hopton. You have to be certain. It's not a servitor, she repeated. But can it touch us? He pressed. Yeah. Katie added. That's the important bit. I spoke up, staring out of the window, my arms folded and my tentacles tight against a sudden inner chill. It's not like Marmite. Edward wouldn't risk that again. I could just walk up and touch that spider. If he's piloting it like he did with Marmite, well, I'm more experienced now. He wouldn't get away from me. I shook my head. He wouldn't risk it. Felicity said gently, softly, as if she didn't expect anybody to hear, mages are more cautious than that. Old ones especially. Evelyn snapped. And therein lies the bait. It's a bluff, a trick to draw us out. Katie spoke up too. Ain't that what the hounds are for? Keep us away from its legs so we can't. Her eyes slid to me, nervous and uncertain. Do something unnatural to it. Evelyn snorted. Heather riding Zhang's back could be past them in seconds. No, the hounds don't matter. Then she pointed at me with her walking stick. Do not actually do that, Heather. I forbid it. This is a trap. Zheng purred. The shaman rides where she wants, when she wants, how she wants. Twill huffed. Thought you were a tiger, not a horse. Nicole was still squinting out into the sunlight. What about the big sloth things in the trees? They've giving me the creeps. They're not moving. None of us could quite make out the details of the lurkers in the trees. They were furred and rough, gray-brown lumps, hanging like sloths but each as large as a cow. Michael Hopton produced an ancient pair of binoculars from somewhere, squinted through them, then passed them around so we could all try. I shook my head, couldn't make them out properly. Trying made my eyes water. Twill tooted. They're real flesh, that's for sure. Can see 'em even without the glasses. Fat bastards too. Do not be rude, said Preem. Evelyn said, they're the real threat. 100 pounds says so. The spider is bait, to flush us out or scatter us. The hounds are chaff. She huffed. But he would know I'd figure all this out. He would know. It's a double bluff. Something I'm not seeing here. Something I'm not seeing. She trailed off, talking between gritted teeth. It's not a spirit, I murmured. What? Heather? Katie sighed. Here we go again. It's not a spirit, I repeated. The spider, I mean. It's not. Nobody said anything, so I glanced back and found a room full of bewildered faces staring at me, at my tone of voice. The Hoptons were doubly confused, tugged back and forth between reassurance and fresh panic. Twill was squinting at me in confusion. Kimberly, at the rear of the room, looked oddly calm compared to her usual panic, just nodding at me. Only. Felicity seemed to understand what I meant, grim-faced and ready to die. Lozzie and Tenny had reappeared in the doorway, escorted by Sevens and Aim. I bit my lip at them. Sevens said, I could not stop them. Tens is scared, Lozzie said. She has a right to know, like everybody else. Heathy. BRT, went Tenny, eyes so huge and black, staring at me for reassurance. Half her tentacles were wrapped around Lozzie, the other half hugging herself. Her wingcloak obscured the front of her body, pulled tight, beginning to shift and flutter like oil dancing on water. Her instincts were telling her to hide. She blinked at me, then past me at the giant spider which was taking another striding step across the field, heading for the house. Heath. Heather. My bioreactor slid a control rod out, smooth and sharp, then a second, with a quick little pain in my side. I couldn't stop that from happening, not if I'd shoved a tentacle inside my flank and grown pneumosomatic flesh over the organs. I felt my skin flush and my thoughts clear. Something hardened inside my chest. Tenny did not deserve to be afraid like this. Hey, Tens, said Rain. We're gonna be perfectly safe. I promise you, I'll make us safe. Me and everybody else. You hear that, Tens? Yeah, went Tenny. Lozzie, I spoke up quickly. If the worst starts to happen. Lozzie finished before I could, grab as many people as I can and off to Camelot to visit the castle. Yes. Thank you. Evelyn hissed. Heather, what do you mean it's not a spirit? Don't just say that and then move on. Sorry. I snapped my attention to Evie and she blinked as if surprised by something in my eyes. It doesn't look like a spirit. I can't explain it very well, but it's the same reason that I could tell Marmite wasn't a true servitor. Spirits look organic. Their logic is organic. Or there's no logic at all. I shrugged, thinking of hundreds of bizarre shapes and amalgams and warped creatures I'd seen over the years, stumbling and loping and hopping and drooling. My shoulders felt like electricity and rubber and oil. Servitors look artificial. Made. Crafted. It's subtle, but it's there. I looked up at the spider. That's not organic. Somebody made that. It's still bait, Evie said. Said Twill, tugging the glasses down her face. What if it's like an illusion? Can mages do that? Can we do that? Her mother gave a little sigh. No, dear. Rain said, illusion would make sense, but it's a big risk for us to assume. Evie. Somebody needs to check, said Katie. Somebody's gonna have to go out there and check, before it hits the house. And step into this trap. Evelyn snapped at her. No. It's either a spirit or... Evie, it's not a spirit, I repeated. Or an illusion, Evelyn finished, eyes blazing at me. Heather, talk to me, what is happening? I blinked at her. I'm sorry. Evie huffed. Twill laughed. Benjamin Hopton nodded at something he saw in my face, nodded with approval. Nicole just sighed and said, seen her like this before. Great. Just what we need. What? I stammered, wrong-footed. I mean, pardon me. Rain said, Heather, you look like you're ready to fight God. Also like you might win. Bewildered, I rubbed a hand over my face and felt it come away sweaty and cold. My eyes were wide, my heart was pounding, and I was vibrating all over, but I wasn't afraid. Just a little anxious, a seed of anxiety in my chest getting ground to paste by teeth inside my heart. I was ready to do something. Rain was right about that. My tentacles were twitching and aching, inching toward the door handle and the bar over the glass. My body was dying to move. I kept scrunching my toes. Stay put, Evelyn snapped at me. It's an illusion or a trick. What about the bubbles? Nicole asked. Can't they deal with it? Check if it's real, or smother it. There's enough of them. It took me a moment to realize that Nicole was referring to the circular wall of bubble servitors, Cringewindla's angels arrayed in a ring around the house and clustered on the roof. Semi-transparent, oily and greasy and sliding over each other in a slow standing wave, they had barely reacted to the spider servitor or the hound so far. I could still see the few of them which were stationed on the corrugated metal roof of the animal stables, low and waiting, not engaging either spider or dogs or the lumpy masses waiting in the trees. Twill must have followed my eyes, because she said, hope the alpacas are all right. Poor buggers. Language, Evelyn snapped. Tenny is here with us. PLBT, went Tenny. All of a sudden, Amanda Hopton opened her eyes and stood up. She'd been settled in a chair for a while now, hugging herself, taking slow and steady breaths, eyes closed tight, as if trying to fight down a panic attack. But now she stood, groped for Christine's arm, and spoke in a broken rush. Cringewindla does not like this. He will not send his angels his parts, his buds. This is a trap, Evelyn say is correct, Cringewindla agrees. There is a trap here that none of us can see and he cannot see either. He will not move for this, he will protect this house. He will protect this house and seal us in flesh if he must, but he will not move. Several worried expressions graced several frowny faces. Seal us in flesh? Twill asked. Yo, what? Yuck, said Katie. Benjamin swallowed hard. Don't insult him. Felicity spoke up. I don't like the sound of being swallowed by an outsider, even a friendly one. We should move. She couldn't meet Evie's eyes. I'm sorry Evie, but we have to. We can't know what that spider really is. I don't know what it is. And I agree with the outsider. Something isn't right here. We stay put. Evelyn snapped. It's a bluff. It will pass through us. If we move now we open ourselves up to being scattered and picked off. If something attacks the house now, we're all together, we support each other. Nobody runs. Her eyes flicked to the back of the room to Sevens. Sevens took a breath and sighed, ice cold. Evie didn't even need to ask the question. I can do nothing here, Evelyn, said Seven Shades of Self-Selection. It is far outside my definition. I am as you. Then we stay put, Evelyn repeated. Zheng rumbled long and low and loud, the sound vibrating in her chest, deep and resonant as she turned away from the window and strode for the corridor. Mages and gods alike, both cowards. I spit on your divinity and your fear. Zheng. I said her name, but onward she strode. Tenny and Lozzie ducked out of the way for her as she stepped into the corridor. The room erupted in chaos once again. What? What's her plan? What's the big zombie doing now? Trust her. I trust her. That was Rain, bless her heart. Windla won't go, we shouldn't either. Zheng. Somebody stop her. Zheng. Evie, shouting. But who could stop Zheng except me? For a moment I thought Rain was going to try. She hurried away from the general mayhem and into the mouth of the corridor just as Zheng was stepping through. She touched Zheng's arm with her fingertips. Zheng paused and dipped her head in silent question. Plan. I heard Rain say, underneath the shouting and the demands and the argument. Punch a leg, Zheng rumbled. That's it. Zheng shrugged. If I cannot, it is not real. If I can, I pull it apart and eat it. Spider, said Preem. Rain grinned like an absolute madwoman. She nodded, once. I'm in. Zheng grinned back. You stay here, little wolf. Watch them. Got it. Good hunting. Zheng strode on into the corridor. Evelyn was shouting about how Zheng shouldn't go out there, about how demons were not invincible, about how she was being a moron and trying to get herself killed. I noticed that Evie's free hand was wrapped tight around one of Preem's arms, perhaps to stop her joining this doomed sally forth from our castle gates. Abyssal instinct agreed with Zheng. Abyssal instinct picked up my feet and trotted me after her to catch up before she reached the front door. Evelyn screamed my name. I turned, my face blazing, my mind already leaping ahead. Before I answered Evie, I met Rain's eyes. Rain nodded once, my rock, my confidence, the source of everything I could do. Rain, I'm going to. I get it, Heather, Rain said quickly. I get the plan. Well, I don't. Evelyn snapped. Heather, stay here. Stay put. Words spilled from my lips. The plan was already fully formed, as if abyssal instinct could see it clearer than my monkey brain could dare. The plan was all speed and timing and muscle, predation and quick escape, the very currency that abyssal instinct understood the best of all. Evie, it's fine. Listen, please. It's safer this way. If it's a trap, then I can just slip myself and Zheng outside in the blink of an eye. Bad metaphor, but you see what I mean. Zheng wants to punch that spider in the leg, but I can do better. All I have to do is touch it with my tentacles and I can send it outside. I can send it anywhere, dump it somewhere horrible, or in Camelot so the knights and caterpillars can dismantle it. I glanced over my shoulder at Lozzie as I said that part. She nodded with great enthusiasm, still wrapped in Tenny's silken black tentacles. And if Edward really is stupid enough to be remote piloting it, then we've got him. I can chase him down easily and quickly. I did it before and I know what I'm doing. I'm not losing myself to anger. This is clear. It makes the most sense. And I'll ride on Zheng's back. Like before. Evelyn stared at me with an expression like she had eaten an entire lemon. Rain cleared her throat. It does make sense, Evie. Yeah, I vote for this, Katie added. Felicity met my eyes. Be safe. Be back quick. We don't know what those are in the trees. Could be about a dozen different things, and I don't like any of them. Could it be something that would punch through Windla's angels? I asked. Felicity considered for a moment, then shook her head. Amanda looked vaguely sick at this suggestion. Evie crunched out her words at me, clipped and short. If one of those things in the trees even twitches in your direction, you leave, you slip, outside. I insist, Heather. I trust you, but I insist. I promise I will, I said. Just the spider. You insist and I obey. We'll be right back. It was a strange combination of words which spilled from my lips. I had not planned to say that. I obey. But it felt right and it made my insides sing, it made the bioreactor run smooth and sharp and clean, deep down in my belly. It made Rain's eyebrows shoot up and Twill splutter and Felicity stare at me with something oddly akin to affection. But most importantly it made Evie nod. Hey, Heather, Rain said quickly. Turn on Zheng's phone and call mine. Keep the call connected, so we can hear. Yes. Okay. Evelyn hissed. All right. Go. And quick. I turned and ran down the shadowy spinal corridor of Gearswin farmhouse, right past Sevens and Ames. Sevens reached out to me and I ducked my head unthinkingly, to kiss her fingers in a fleeting touch. I never could have done that on anything less than a full dose of adrenaline and abyssal chemicals and hormones racing through my veins. I would have blushed myself to death. Through the falling sunbeams and onto Zheng's heels as she opened the front door. Shaman. Zheng didn't sound very surprised. She paused as I scrambled up her back, climbing her with hands and tentacles and then clinging on tight around her shoulders and neck. She was so warm, warmer than the sun-kissed brick steps that she stepped out onto. She didn't question me mounting her back, just kept her head half-turned to listen. Better plan, I hissed. Get me close enough to touch the spider's leg. If Edward is in there I'll chase him down and then eat him alive. Eat his mind. If he's not in there then I'll zap the whole spider outside, though I might pass out if I do that, so maybe we'll go with it, to Camelot. And if it's an illusion, we'll know. Zheng broke into a grin. I like this plan, Shaman. I like any plan where we are together. I love you too, Zheng, I whispered, and held on tight. Give me your phone. I need to keep us connected. Zheng jumped down the steps and onto the crumbly, broken tarmac in one long bound. My heart soared already, to move with such speed. She fished out her phone and pressed it into one of my tentacles. I dialed Rain, heard her on the other end, and then let the call sit. The ring of bubble servitors was all around us, an oily, jellied wall of outsider angels, reaching upward in hope of becoming a dome. Zheng turned toward the field and they parted for her. I couldn't help but think they knew she would just rip through them anyway, if they refused to move. The spider servitor towered over the house and the field and the treetops, black and shiny and glinting in the clear crisp sunlight. The leaves shivered and shook in a gentle breeze. All around the spider's feet a dozen hounds surged forward as protection, shadowing the legs as it strode toward the house. Ready, Shaman. I tightened my grip on Zheng. The plan was perfect. Only she and I could have pulled this off. Zheng's speed and strength and power, with my hyperdimensional mathematics as a payload. If it really was a trap, we didn't have to turn and run, we could simply be gone, elsewhere, outside. If there was a secret magic circle in the underbelly of the spider, waiting to trap me and drain my blood, I would be ready for that too, diving into it all tooth and claw and spiked tentacle. Edward wouldn't know what hit him. We were ready for anything. Edward could have a team of men stationed inside the tree line with rifles and I would simply flick the bullets away. I was so switched on, so ready. Twill and Preem both appeared in the doorway of the house. Twill hung out and stared up at the spider, then met my curious look. Just here as backup, case you gotta run, she said. Go, bloody hell. Zheng, I whispered. Shaman. The Heather of 6 months ago would have been a vibrating mess of jellied nerves and a heart like a panicked dove. The Heather of a year ago would be struck catatonic with fear. The Heather of my childhood could barely have imagined this. But the heather right then and there was flush with abyssal instinct and purpose and a burning need to protect my friends. "I love this so much," I managed to say in the split second of thought I had left before Jing broke from a standing start. And she was off, flying like the wind. Jing moved so fast that I had no time to think, no time to compose or plan or change course. All I could do was cling on hard and keep one tentacle free and ready for the final task. She vaulted the fence into the field in one smooth bound, landed on the balls of her feet in the packed mud, and then shot straight toward the giant spider servitor, aiming for the nearest of the legs. She darted around the piles of day-old grass clippings, leapt the remnants of the mud-cut magic circle, and refused to veer away from the onrushing hounds. "Zheng! Dogs!" I screamed, though it was totally unnecessary. The hounds surged forward before Zheng and I could reach the leg. Evelyn was right, the hounds were meant to keep us away from the siege machinery. Rain would explain the principle to me later, but most of it went in one ear and out the other, something about how armor and infantry had to work together. Zheng liked it, because in that metaphor she was a missile. Evelyn was right about something else too, the hounds were chaff. All dozen of them came for Zheng at once, snapping steel-toothed jaws in blind faces, wired joints racing, leaping for her belly and throat, darting for hamstrings and ankles. Zheng kicked one of them so hard the hound burst on the spot. She turned and punched another, ripped out a throat with her teeth, roaring through a closed mouth. She pulled off a leg and speared it through the belly of a different hound, thin dry blood going everywhere. And I was in the middle of the carnage, face buried in her back, trying not to scream. One hound got behind her, slinking low and quick into her blind spot. She would have turned and killed it the moment it leapt for her, but I lashed out with my spare tentacle before I had time to think, jabbing it in the eyes and throat and knocking it off balance. Zheng spun and brought a fist down, breaking the hound's spine. The remaining dogs fled beyond reach, whining and panting and bleeding, to growl at us from the edge of the field. Zheng did not stay to gloat or laugh. As soon as the pack disengaged, she whirled around and sprinted for the nearest spider leg. That massive black-armored leg was in motion again. The spider had taken several minutes just to edge into the field, creeping slowly despite its huge size. I decided in that last split second that Evie was probably correct, this was a trap. It made too much sense not to be. The spider moved too slowly, the hounds were too few in number, and the hanging shapes in the trees were too obviously not yet committed to the assault. But we were ready, Zheng and I. We were perfect. Her speed and strength and limitless violence, my brain math and abyssal instinct. We would confirm the spider for what it was and call Edward's bluff, let him spring his trap, we would be gone before the blow could land. And then the mages, my friends, my family, my pack would take his answer apart. The brain math prep was going to my head like alcohol. As we raced those last few steps toward the spider, I plunged my thoughts into the black and sucking tar down in the base of my soul. I grasped 3 different sets of equations at once, preparing to use all of them or none of them. I braced my tentacles against Zheng, coiling up the one spare. We were under the body of the spider, feet away from a black and chitinous leg. Zheng skidded to a halt in the mud, kicking up clods of grass and dirt. She didn't want the impact to whip me off her back. I uncoiled my free tentacle like a frog's tongue, a dart of pneumosomatic flesh. As it flashed through the air, the tip hardened into biosteel and sharpened to a blade, a harpoon with enough force to crack the armor and sink into the meat beneath, to make the connection, one from which Edward Lilburn could not run. And the dart passed through the leg as if through air. Not even pneumosomatic flesh. Illusion. I cried out, loud enough so both Zheng and the phone could hear me. It's not real. Voices hooped on the other end of the phone, still tucked against my chest. I think I heard a sigh. Somebody said, voice tinny and distorted, Heather, leave, now. Go. We agreed. Yes. Yes, of course of. Shaman. Zheng went still. She was staring at the trees, at the bulbous sloth shapes within. Even this close they were impossible to truly make out, odd lumpy fur and too many limbs clinging to the trees. No visible eyes, but thin stalks rising from headless shoulders like the current feelers of some undersea organism. Claws, but poking out at all the wrong angles, in the wrong directions. Each one was huge, the size of a horse, but I had the sudden and distinct impression that size was a lie. A glance made my eyes water. As one, they dropped. I had called Edward Lilburn's bluff. He had sprung his trap on something that could slip away with supernatural ease. I did not stay to watch, I did not stay to see if Zheng could outfight one of these things. I kept my promise to Evie, I spun up those old familiar equations, that burning acid on the surface of my mind, that well-mapped pain of going out. But at the last second I slammed the equation to a halt, choking and spluttering on Zheng's back, snorting nosebleed all down her shoulder. The sloth shapes had dropped then shot upward, out of the tree line, blossoming and scudding through the air above the field on an arc like a barrage of artillery shells. Unfolding their flesh, peeling open the disguise of fur and claw, revealing the lie coiled inside, each of the creatures that had hung in the trees was a blob of writhing, wet red flesh, punctuated with mouths, spines, and muscular tentacles, all joined together by bizarre five-pointed biological structures. Tendrils ended in black eyeballs. Trumpet shapes pointed backward, like underwater jet propulsion. Spines bristled and mandibles clacked and claws jangled. It wasn't the shape of the things that was awful, in isolation they looked almost like rubber monsters from a terrible old horror movie. Attack of the Flying Blobs. I'd seen 100 things far worse, things that made my skin crawl and my hair stand on end. The awful part was the way their flesh tore through the air, as if at odds with this plane of reality. Even watching them move made my eyes hurt and my stomach clench. I realized they'd been folded up like that not to act as bait, nor to hide the sting of the trap, but to conserve energy. They were dying as they moved, because they were not meant to be here. They had been summoned in an act of sacrificial violence. They would not survive more than a few minutes, but neither would anything they were pointed at. Living missiles. These horrible, twisted forms were probably mockeries of how they usually looked. Later on, in the aftermath, Rain used the word Shoggoth, and Evelyn told her off for spouting fictional nonsense. The nightmare amalgams were not servitor or spirit or demon. They were from outside, summoned directly, in the flesh, and they were dying as they screamed. And they weren't reacting to Zheng and I. They were going for the house. Zheng. I screamed, but she was already turning and sprinting back the way we came. Not fast enough. The outsiders had gotten a head start of a few seconds. As they passed through the illusionary spider servitor, the oil rig-sized projection wavered and vanished, the trick having served its purpose. The wall of Hringewindla's angels rose to meet them in a mass of oil-slick bubbles. There were a dozen of those pitiful, obscene outsiders. They hit the bubble servitors like ingots of red-hot iron dropped on a block of ice. Great gouts of blood and flesh and oily bubble mass went up like clouds of superheated steam. Whirring, slicing, sucking, pulling. Limbs and teeth and claws flew aside and flopped to the ground, severed and twitching. Bubble servitors were turned into shredded goo and fell apart, then reformed and sealed the gaps. One of the outsiders went down covered in angels, like a wasp overheated by bees. Another was pulled into pieces, right down to red mist. A third had a hole through the middle, a bubble servitor burrowing through its flesh. A dozen outsiders hit Hringewindla's angels. 6 survived long enough to hit the farmhouse. They smashed through the windows in a shower of brick and wood and shards of glass. By the time Zheng's feet touched the crumbly tarmac, we were only a split second behind the dying outsiders, and I wasn't properly conscious. I think I broke the Hoptons' front door. If I didn't, then Zheng finished the job, hot on my heels. I don't remember much about the next 60 seconds, I was there, I was present, I did everything intentionally, but the images blur together into a rush of nonsense which only makes any sense in retrospect. Panic and adrenaline are radioactive to coherent memory. Gunshots, screaming, a cacophony of voices and roaring and tearing flesh. One of the outsiders, pinned against the wall, lashed to pieces, to mince, taken apart by tentacle hook and razor-sharp blade. Yellow fur at my side, yellow scent and yellow embrace. Somebody, I think Rain, or maybe Nicole, screaming, "Where's Lozzie? Where's Lozzie?" Lozzie, with Tenny sheltering under one arm, reaching out to touch one of the outsiders, so it just dropped dead at her feet and Lozzie collapsing into the most awful weeping. Gunshots, a lot of gunshots. My own face caught in the mirror. Bleeding from the gums. Eyes with two sets of nictitating membranes flickering across my enlarged pupils. Bruised all over. A corona of sharp flesh and hooked claws. Zheng howling with laughter in victory. Kimberly behind her, screaming. Preem saying, quite clearly, "Ambulance." Evie's hand on my neck. Then sleep. I didn't pass out for long. A few seconds at most. I came round lying on the floor of the Hoptons' dining room, feeling like I'd been worked over with a rolling pin and Zheng's fists. "She's fine," Rain called from next to me as my eyes creaked open. "She's fine. She's just spent. Pulse is normal, everything is good." "Rain." I croaked. Rain turned back to me quickly, wiping the sweat and the blood off my forehead. "Heather, hey. Look at me, look at my eyes. You're with us, right? You're right here, yeah. Focus on me." Lozzie's face peered over her shoulder, tear-streaked and snotty. "Heath is right here." My throat felt like sandpaper. My eyes ached. My teeth hurt. My neck felt like a vice was clamped to the sides. A dozen bruises complained when I moved. "What, Rain, is everybody?" Rain wet her lips and hesitated, which made my heart shudder with fear. Then she very gently helped me sit up, in the ruins of Hopton's beautiful dining room. "Mostly," she said, in one of the most leaden tones I'd ever heard from Rain. Evelyn piped up from somewhere behind me too. "You're lucky it was only a leg, detective." Her voice was shaking. "Somebody needs to put her in a car, right now. We can't deal with broken bones ourselves." "On it," said Benjamin Hopton. "Oh," I murmured, looking around, saying stupid things because I was dazed and bruised and had spent a full 60 seconds wearing the abyss like a suit of armor. "Oh. Oh no. We hurt the house." Somebody laughed, but it was very weak and not very amused. In truth, we had done very little damage to Gearswin farmhouse. Most of the real hurt had been inflicted by the outsiders shattering windows and plowing their way through doors. The dining room table was in 3 ragged pieces and 2 of the sad flesh abominations were splayed out across it, bleeding into the carpet, full of bullet holes and claw marks and even a few bites. Twill's contribution. The lovely patio doors were completely broken, glass everywhere, the beam buckled and bent from the impact. We pieced it all together later. In the actual seconds and minutes of aftermath, nobody cared exactly how it had gone down in that single minute of terrible violence, just that everybody was accounted for, not lethally wounded, and not eaten by an outsider blob monster. Of the 6 outsiders which had reached the house, 1 had gone straight in through the window to Twill's bedroom. Lozzie had killed it with a touch. It's not mercy and I'm never doing it again. Never. I hate him. I hate my brother and I hate my uncle. He doesn't have the right to do this. She couldn't stop crying. A second had crashed into the kitchen. Twill had dueled that one alone, assisted by random pot shots from Katie. Duel is perhaps too polite, because Twill had lost a lot of clothes and was covered literally head to toe in blood, even when she shivered out of werewolf form. She looked worse than Kimberly had after the spell. She'd fought the thing by just hacking and biting at it, out-healing the monster ripping at her flesh. She'd shaken it to pieces and made the worst mess one could ever imagine in the Hoptons' kitchen. A third had circled the building at speed and came in through the side door in the little sitting room, late to the party. Zheng had caught that one as she'd followed me inside, then taken it apart with great and savage joy. A fourth had ended up in the corridor somehow. We weren't quite sure where it had come from, maybe from the kitchen when Twill had been fighting number 2. It had been trying to get at the rear of the action in the dining room, to surprise the mages. "You landed on it," was all Kimberly could say, staring at me shell-shocked and shivering. "You landed on it and, there was a lot of you had hooks in your tentacles." I wasn't surprised she couldn't describe the encounter in detail. There wasn't much left of number 4, just minced meat. I remembered very little of that, mostly blood, and yellow fur at my back. The 5th and 6th outsiders had formed the main event. They'd come in through the patio doors, right at the largest concentration of prey, of human beings and others. Evelyn and Felicity had done some rough and raw magic, broken something inside both creatures. They'd paid for it with bleeding throats. Evelyn couldn't stand properly, Preem was all but carrying her. Felicity was in a corner, vomiting bloody bile, wiping her lips, insisting she was okay. The others had bought the pair of mages time to work that magic, and some had paid for it. Preem's maid dress, her lovely new one that she'd picked out herself, was ruined. She was thankfully untouched. Katie had a very minor head wound, scrape on the scalp, it's nothing, just a lot of blood. Benjamin Hopton had broken the shotgun, literally, the stock was splintered, his hands were bloody, his forearms covered in scratches like he'd dragged himself through a bramble patch. "I'll live." Amanda Hopton was curled in a ball, whimpering. A bubble servitor was pressed to her back. The cone snail god under the woods had not approved of this vile trick. I was bruised all over, felt like I'd pulled something important inside my abdomen, like my bioreactor had overheated and shut down in emergency mode, my side was tight and hot and my head swam when I tried to stand up, my eyesight kept swirling sideways, thick with black at the edges. I needed rest, but that didn't matter. Tenny was crying, which was a war crime as far as I was concerned. "That was his real shot," Evelyn kept saying. "That was his real shot. That was the real thing." Outsiders, actual creatures. Physical presence. The real thing. That was his real shot, he spent it. We stuck together and we won. None of that mattered. Because nobody could find sevens and aim.